Tell no one, let them go in. Colonel Nathan Briggs said those 5 words with the flat, emotionless tone of a man ordering a side of toast. He closed the heavy, classified folder, the sound of the cardboard slapping together echoing like a gunshot in the cramped, dimly lit radio room. Without another word, he turned his back on the monitors and walked away, his polished boots clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor. Outside the base in the sweltering Syrian heat, 32 American soldiers were already moving through the jagged shadows of a narrow valley, their boots crunching on the dry earth, unaware that the ground beneath them had already been sold. Briggs had seen the intelligence report. He had seen the confirmed enemy positions, the thermal signatures of the heavy machine guns tucked into the ridge lines, and the logistical map of a guaranteed ambush. He had known for 6 hours that he was sending those men into a meat grinder. He buried the report deliberately, pushing it into the dark recesses of a secure server because that specific operation exposed a paper trail he couldn't afford for anyone to see. It was a trade, 32 lives for the continued burial of his own rising list of crimes. Miles away from the screams that eventually tore through the radio static, Briggs sat in a climate-controlled office and signed a promotion letter for himself. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, looking at a face that showed no trace of the blood he had just spilled. Later, he would stand on a tarmac under a gray sky and shake the trembling hands of widows. He would look them in the eye with a practiced, somber gravity and call their husbands heroes. He would talk about sacrifice and duty and the high cost of freedom. What he never calculated, what his spreadsheets and tactical maps could never account for, was a lone sniper who loved one of those fallen men like a brother. A man who wasn't interested in medals or official reports. A man who was already sitting in the dirt, miles away, counting the distance and waiting for the wind to die down. Emily Carter had a rule she lived by, and it was as rigid as the steel she worked with every day. Never ask questions that aren't yours to ask. It was a survival mechanism as much as a philosophy. For 11 years, she had followed that rule faithfully, working as a civilian weapons technician at Creech Air Force Base in the heart of the Nevada desert. 11 years of cleaning carbon from heavy barrels, calibrating high-end optical scopes, logging endless serial numbers, and keeping her head down so far that she was practically part of the floorboards. She was good at her job. In the world of precision ballistics, she was better than good. She was exceptional in the quiet, terrifying way that only someone obsessed with the smallest details can be. But exceptionality in a military base is often overlooked when it belongs to a civilian woman who doesn't wear a uniform or carry a rank. The soldiers simply called her Carter. There was no Miss, no Emily. Just the harsh, utilitarian surname barked out as if she were a piece of equipment, a vending machine, or a sturdy workbench that had always been there and always would be. She didn't mind the lack of courtesy. In fact, she had stopped minding somewhere around the 4-year mark when she realized that invisibility was a form of power. When people think you are part of the furniture, they stop performing. They stop hiding. They let their guards down. And because nobody was watching Emily, Emily was able to watch everyone. She noticed the subtle shifts in the atmosphere of the base. She noticed which officers entered the armory with their jaws clenched in anger and which ones came in with a hollow, haunted quiet in their eyes. She noticed the rifles that came back from deployment with stress fractures in the receivers that no one had officially reported. She saw the scopes that had been adjusted by panicked, trembling hands that didn't know what they were doing in the heat of a firefight. She saw the paperwork that was wrong, the calibrations that were off, and the weapons that should have been decommissioned months before they were pushed back into the field. In her private moments, she fixed things that weren't on her assignment list. She logged discrepancies that no one had asked her to track. She kept a small green journal tucked into the left pocket of her work vest, a weathered notebook where she wrote down every anomaly that didn't sit right with her. It wasn't born out of ambition or a desire to play detective. It was born out of a bone-deep, fundamental belief that precision is the only thing that matters in a chaotic world. The difference between a weapon functioning perfectly and failing catastrophically was almost always a matter of a few microns, a tiny oversight that someone else was too busy or too lazy to notice. That notebook, filled with the cramped, precise handwriting of a woman who saw the world in terms of tolerances and torque, would later become one of the most devastating pieces of evidence in a military tribunal. But on the afternoon that the world began to tilt on its axis, it was just a notebook in her pocket, and she was just a woman bent over a disassembled Macmillan TAC-50. The armory was a place of sensory extremes. It smelled of heavy gun oil, cold metal, and the particular dusty chill that Nevada desert bases seem to hold in their bones even when the sun is screaming outside. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed at a low, irritating frequency that Emily had long ago learned to tune out. Outside, a harsh wind was picking up across the salt flats, the kind of wind that made range days a misery for the shooters. It was the kind of wind that changed everything about how a projectile traveled through the air. Emily was thinking about that wind. Specifically, she was thinking about the Coriolis effect, the way the rotation of the Earth literally pulls the ground out from under a bullet while it's in flight. Most people, even experienced shooters, didn't account for it properly once they passed the 800-meter mark. To Emily, ballistics wasn't just math, it was music. She could hear the rhythm of the physics in her head, a complex symphony of air density, humidity, and gravity. She didn't hear the door open over the hum of the lights and the wind. She heard the boots, though. They were heavy, deliberate, and carried the weight of someone who didn't feel the need to adjust their path for anyone else. She didn't look up immediately. Soldiers were a constant stream in her life, coming and going with their broken parts and their demands. Carter. The voice was direct. It wasn't aggressive, but it lacked the softness of a request. It was the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime giving orders and seeing them executed without question. Emily paused, her hand holding a bore brush halfway through the long barrel of the TAC-50. She looked up. Captain Ethan Walker was standing 4 feet from her workbench. Even in a place full of elite soldiers, Walker stood out. He was Special Forces, an officer whose record was a collection of redacted lines and classified stamps. He was in his early 40s, with a face that looked as though it had been carved out of hard decisions and long nights of patience. His eyes were the color of cold slate, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her set down her tools before she had consciously decided to do so. "Captain," she said, her voice steady. Walker didn't bother with the usual military pleasantries. He never did. He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space of her workstation. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice dropping an octave, "and I need you to give me an honest answer, not a diplomatic one. Do you understand?" Emily kept her expression as neutral as the steel on her bench. "That's usually how I answer. It's the only way the math works." Walker studied her for a long moment, as if he were scanning her for flaws in her construction. Then he leaned in, his voice barely a whisper against the hum of the armory. "Can a human being make a confirmed sniper kill from 3,800 meters? The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that has actual mass. Emily's first instinct was the reflexive rejection of a professional who knew the limits of her craft. Her mouth opened, and the word was out before her brain had fully finished the calculation. "No." Walker didn't blink. "You're sure about that?" "The world record for a confirmed sniper kill is just over 3,500 meters, Emily said, leaning on the facts because facts were the only safe ground she knew. That was a corporal of horse in the Canadian Army in 2017 in Afghanistan. That shot required 2 full minutes of atmospheric calculation before the trigger was even touched. He used a weapon so customized it was essentially a one-of-a-kind prototype, and he was working in atmospheric conditions that may never be replicated again in our lifetime. 3,800 meters isn't just a long shot, Captain. It's beyond the threshold of what current ballistic physics allows for a reliable kill shot. At that distance, the bullet is essentially a falling rock. Any platform in existence would struggle to maintain the stability required for that kind of precision." Walker was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Emily counted them. "What if I told you," he said, speaking with a slow, deliberate cadence, "that it already happened 3 weeks ago?" Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She blinked, her mind racing through the variables. Then either your intelligence report is wrong, or someone is lying to you about the distance, or both. The distance was independently measured by 2 separate high-resolution surveillance systems, Walker countered. "The data is verified." She stared at him, her eyes narrowing. "Then someone is lying about the kill. They might have hit a target, but it wasn't a lethal shot, or it was a fluke of nature that won't happen again in 1,000 years. The target is dead," Walker said. "We have the drone footage of the recovery. 1 shot. Center mass. He was dead before he hit the ground." The fluorescent light above the bench flickered once, casting a momentary shadow across the disassembled rifle. Neither of them looked up. "Who was the shooter?" Emily asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. She felt a shift in the room, a change in the very fabric of her reality. The invisible wall she had built around herself for 11 years was starting to crack. Walker pulled a heavy metal chair from the corner of the room and sat down across from her. He didn't sit in the casual way of a man looking for a chat. He sat the way a man does when he knows a conversation is going to be long, difficult, and potentially dangerous. "That's the problem," he said. "We don't know who he is." Emily picked up the boar brush again. Not because the barrel needed more cleaning, but because her hands were beginning to shake, and she needed the familiar weight of the tool to ground her. "So," she said, trying to process the impossibility, "you have a shot that defies the laws of physics, a distance that shouldn't be reachable, and a shooter who doesn't exist on any manifest." "Yes, and you came to me because you're the only person on this base who can tell me if it's actually impossible or if there's a mechanical explanation I'm missing," Walker said. "And there's one more thing. The weapon used in the operation, we've traced the components. They passed through this armory 6 months ago." The boar brush stopped mid-stroke. Emily set it down with a click that sounded like a hammer falling on an empty chamber. "Which weapon?" Walker reached into a leather folder he had been carrying. He pulled out a high-resolution photograph and slid it across the oily surface of the workbench. It was a rifle, but not one Emily recognized as a standard issue. It was a Macmillan TAC-50, but it had been cannibalized and rebuilt. It had a custom-contoured heavy barrel, a modified stock, and a unique trigger assembly. But what caught Emily's eye was the scope mount. It featured a specific hand-fabricated adapter that she recognized instantly. Her stomach dropped, a cold, heavy sensation blooming in her gut. "I built that adapter," she whispered. "I remember it. I spent 3 nights in the machine shop getting the tolerances down to 1/1000th of an inch." Walker's jaw tightened. "I know you did. But the requisition for that part was filed under a unit designation that was officially dissolved 4 months ago. It shouldn't exist." Emily looked up from the photo, her eyes wide. "That's not how the system works. Every part, every hour of labor has to be tied to an active unit. You can't just requisition custom fabrication for a ghost unit." "No," Walker agreed, leaning closer. "You can't. Not unless someone with a very high level of clearance is signing the forms and wiping the digital footprint afterward." Emily stood up. She didn't do it with a flourish. She wasn't a dramatic woman, but she moved with the sudden, sharp focus of someone who had just recalculated a trajectory and found that the target was much closer than she thought. "Captain," she said, her voice hard, "what exactly are you investigating? This isn't just about a long-distance record." Walker leaned forward, his slate-gray eyes boring into hers. 8 months ago, there was an operation in Syria called Stillwater. It was a surveillance mission that turned into a massacre. 2 American soldiers were killed in an ambush that, according to the initial after-action reports, was unavoidable. The terrain was bad, the intel was thin, and the enemy was prepared. That was the official story. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But we've uncovered intelligence that suggests the ambush was entirely avoidable. The information that could have saved those men existed. It was sitting on a desk 6 hours before the first shot was fired. It was never passed down the chain of command. Someone let those men walk into a trap." Emily felt the air in the armory grow thin. She thought about the green notebook in her pocket, the one filled with names and dates and small errors. "Who made that call?" "That's what we're trying to find out," Walker said. "And the 3,800-meter shot is the key." 3 weeks ago, a high-value target in an undisclosed location was eliminated. That target was a former intelligence contractor who had very specific connections to Operation Stillwater. He was the man who could have testified about where that suppressed intelligence went. Now he's dead, taken out by a ghost with a rifle that shouldn't exist. Emily sat back down on her stool, her mind spinning. "The distance," she whispered. 3,847 meters. Why that distance?" Walker looked at her for a long time. Maybe it wasn't about the distance being easy. Maybe it was about the distance being a message. "We have a name for the shooter, though we haven't confirmed his location yet. We believe it's a man named Lucas Reed." The name hit Emily like a physical blow. She knew Lucas Reed. Everyone who worked in the high-end armory knew the name. Staff Sergeant Lucas Reed had been one of the most decorated and respected sniper operators in the Ranger Battalion. She had serviced his weapons twice during his time at Creech. He was a man of profound, unsettling silence. He would stand at her workbench for 40 minutes at a time, not talking, just watching her work with an intensity that made other technicians nervous. He would ask questions, but only the kind of questions a true master asks. He didn't want to chat. He wanted to know the exact crystalline structure of the firing pin. He wanted to understand the metallurgy of the barrel. Reed disappeared, she said, her voice trembling, 6 months ago, right after the Syria operation. Walker nodded. His spotter and best friend was one of the 2 men killed in that valley, Tyler Brooks, 26 years old. He left behind a wife and a 7-month-old daughter he never got to hold. The armory felt different now. The smell of the oil was sharper, the hum of the lights more aggressive. The air was thick with the weight of a storm that was still over the horizon but moving fast. "You think Reed is hunting the people responsible," Emily said. It wasn't a question. "I think Reed made an impossible shot to prove that no one is out of his reach," Walker said. "And I think he's just getting started. He's not just a sniper anymore, Carter. He's a man who has turned himself into a precision instrument of vengeance. He has the training, he has the weapon you helped build, and he has a list of names." Emily looked down at the photograph of the rifle. She thought about the adapter she had shaped with her own hands, believing it was for a legitimate mission, believing in the system she served. She thought about Tyler Brooks, dying in a dusty valley because a piece of paper stayed on a desk. She thought about Lucas Reed, a man who had built his life on the idea that if you account for every variable, if you eliminate every error, the outcome will be just. And then he had found out that the most important variable of all was the corruption of the men he served. "Captain," she said, her voice finding a new, colder strength, "what do you need from me?" Walker reached out and tapped the photo. "I need to know how he did it. If 3,800 meters is possible, I need the math. I need to know the platform, the exact grain of the ammunition, and the specific atmospheric conditions he would have needed. If I can understand how he shoots, I can predict where he'll go next. Because whoever is next on that list is likely someone with a lot more protection than a contractor in a safe house. If I give you that," she said, "and it leads you to Reed, what happens to him? That's above my pay grade," Walker said. "And yours?" Emily nodded slowly. She knew what he meant. In the world of black ops and buried reports, there were no clean endings. "When do you need the data?" "Yesterday," Walker said, and for the first time a ghost of a smile touched his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. He stood up, gathered his folder, and walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the frame, looking back at her. "Carter," she looked up. "Nobody else on this base knows we're having this conversation. I need you to understand what that means for you. You're not just a technician anymore. You're part of the investigation. And in a place like this, that makes you a target if the wrong people find out what you're looking at." "I understand," she said. Walker left, the heavy door thudding shut behind him. Emily sat in the silence for a long time. She looked at her hands. They were clean, as they always were. She kept them that way out of a sense of duty to the machines she repaired. But she realized that they didn't feel clean anymore. She picked up her green notebook and opened it to a fresh, white page. At the very top, she wrote, 3,800 meters, possible or not. Below that, she wrote another question. Who signed the requisition for the adapter? She didn't go home that night. She stayed in the armory long after the second shift had left, the base falling into the eerie, artificial quiet of a military installation at night. She sat at her computer, her eyes reflecting the blue light of the monitor as she pulled up the ballistic modeling software. She started with the known quantities. The TAC-50, the custom barrel length, the weight of a .50 caliber projectile. Then she began to layer in the variables. She accounted for the altitude of the Syrian desert. She accounted for the barometric pressure and the specific humidity of the region in the month the shot was taken. She ran the numbers for the spin drift of the bullet, the way the rifling of the barrel makes the projectile drift slightly to the right over long distances. She factored in the aerodynamic jump and the way the bullet's velocity would drop from supersonic to subsonic, a transition that usually tears a flight path apart. She worked for 3 hours, her fingers flying over the keys. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculus and physics. And then at 1:15 in the morning, she found it. The calculation wasn't impossible. It was just vanishingly unlikely. For a bullet to travel 3,847 meters and hit a human-sized target, the shooter would have to account for the Earth's rotation to within a fraction of an inch. He would have to time the shot between heartbeats to prevent the slight tremor of his own pulse from throwing the barrel off by the width of a hair. He would have to know the wind speed not just at his position, but at 4 different points along the bullet's 2-mile flight path. It wasn't a shot. It was a miracle of engineering and willpower. Emily leaned back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lucas Reed hadn't just made the shot. He had mastered the air itself. She turned her attention to the second question in her notebook, the requisition. She bypassed the standard supply chain interface and went into the raw data logs of the base's maintenance server. It was a place she wasn't supposed to be, but she had been fixing the base's technical glitches for so long that she knew the backdoors like the layout of her own kitchen. She searched for the serial number of the adapter she had built. The file appeared. It was heavily encrypted, but the metadata was still there. The unit designation was Delta 7 Sierra. She cross-referenced the designation with the base directory. Deactivated. Dissolved 4 months ago. She dug deeper, looking for the digital signature at the bottom of the work order. The name wasn't Reed. It wasn't Walker. It was Colonel Nathan Briggs. Emily sat perfectly still, the hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly sounding like a warning. She knew that name. Briggs was a rising star in the intelligence community, a man who was frequently seen on the news talking about regional stability and the success of various operations. He was the man who had overseen Operation Stillwater. She realized then that she wasn't looking at a simple case of a rogue sniper. She was looking at a closed loop. Briggs had buried the intel that killed Reed's team. Briggs had then used a ghost unit to requisition the parts for a rifle, perhaps intending it for some other Black Ops purpose. And somehow, Reed had gotten hold of that rifle and was now using it to systematically dismantle the conspiracy that had cost him everything. She thought about the target who had been killed 3 weeks ago. The contractor, he would have been a witness. Who was next? Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She sent a single text to the number Walker had left her. "I have something you need to see." The reply was almost instantaneous. "Tomorrow, 0600, not the armory, the water tower." Emily closed her laptop and stood up. She felt a strange, cold clarity. For 11 years, she had been the woman nobody noticed, the invisible technician who kept the gears turning. But the gears were broken now, and the man who had broken them was sitting in an office only a few miles away. She walked out of the armory and into the Nevada night. The wind was still blowing, carrying the scent of sagebrush and jet fuel. She looked up at the stars and thought about Lucas Reed, out there somewhere in the dark, waiting for the wind to tell him when to pull the trigger. She didn't sleep. She spent the remaining hours of the night in her small, Spartan quarters, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the logic of the long shot. In sniped ballistics, there is a concept called the danger space. It's the area where, regardless of a slight error in range estimation, the bullet will still hit the target. At 3,800 meters, there is no danger space. There is only perfection or failure. There is no middle ground. At 5:45 a.m., she was walking toward the old water tower on the far edge of the base. It was a relic from the base's early days, a rusting skeleton of iron that overlooked the vast, empty flats of the desert. Walker was already there, leaning against a weathered fence, a thermos of coffee in his hand. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "You look like hell," Emily said as she approached. "Occupational hazard," Walker replied, handing her a plastic cup of coffee. "What did you find?" Emily didn't say a word. She simply handed him the green notebook, open to the page with Briggs's name at the bottom. Walker looked at it for a long time. The silence between them grew as the first light of dawn began to bleed over the horizon, turning the desert floor into a sea of purple and gold. He finally closed the notebook and handed it back. "You're sure about the signature?" "The digital hash matches Briggs's personal authorization code," she said. "He didn't just sign it, he prioritized it. He wanted that rifle built fast and he wanted it built quiet." Walker sighed, a long, weary sound. "We suspected Briggs was the one who buried the Stillwater report, but we couldn't prove he had a direct hand in the aftermath. If he's the one who authorized the weapon Reed is using, it means he's either incredibly arrogant or he's playing a game we don't understand yet." Or Emily said, "Reed didn't steal that rifle. Maybe Briggs gave it to him." Walker looked at her, his eyes sharp. "Why would he do that? Maybe as a peace offering? Or maybe Briggs is using Reed to clean up the witnesses before he disposes of Reed, too. Think about it, Captain. If you want to eliminate people who know about a botched operation, who better to use than the man who hates them most? And when it's over, you just tell the world a rogue, traumatized sniper went on a killing spree and you had to put him down. It's a perfect circle." Walker turned his gaze toward the horizon. "It's a theory, a dark one. It's the only one that fits the math," Emily said. "So," Walker said, his voice dropping low, "if Briggs is the one pulling the strings, who is the next target? Who is the last person who can link Briggs to the Stillwater massacre?" Emily thought about the names she had seen in the logs, the officers who had been part of the unit before it was dissolved. She thought about the chain of command, the way information flows from the field to the office and back again. And then it hit her. The realization was so cold and sudden it made her breath hitch. "It's not a witness," she whispered. Walker frowned. "What do you mean?" The contractor was a witness. The other names in the file were subordinates. But there's only one person who has the power to actually bring Briggs down. Only one person who is currently conducting an internal investigation that could lead to a court-martial. Walker's face went pale. He realized it at the same moment she did. "Me," he said. The realization hung in the air, more chilling than the desert wind. If Briggs was using Reed to eliminate threats, then Walker was the ultimate threat. He was the one digging into the files, the one asking questions, the one who had sought out Emily in the first place. Emily looked at the vast, open desert surrounding them. The water tower was an exposed position. It was a place with clear lines of sight for miles in every direction. It was a sniper's dream. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to move. Now." Walker didn't argue. He reached for his sidearm, his eyes scanning the ridgeline 3 miles away. But even as they turned to run, Emily couldn't help but look back at the desert. She thought about the 3,800-meter shot. She thought about the bullet that takes 2 full seconds to reach its destination. In those 2 seconds, the world can change. In those 2 seconds, a man can realize he's been a pawn. In those 2 seconds, a sniper can decide that he's done killing for the men who lied to him. She wondered, as they scrambled toward the safety of the base, which way Lucas Reed was pointing his rifle. Was he looking at them? Or was he already miles away, his crosshairs settled on a polished office window where a colonel was waiting for a report that would never come? The game had changed. The math was no longer about distance. It was about who was holding the rifle and who they were really working for. And Emily Carter, the woman who saw everything, was no longer just watching. She was in the middle of the trajectory, waiting to see where the bullet would finally land. The walk back to the main compound felt miles longer than the journey out. Every shadow between the corrugated metal buildings looked like a silhouette. Every gust of wind sounded like the whistle of approaching lead. Walker kept his pace fast, his hand never straying far from his holster, his eyes constantly moving in the S pattern of a man who spent his life expecting an ambush. Emily struggled to keep up, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. "If Briggs is using Reed," Walker muttered, more to himself than to her, "then Reed isn't just a sniper, he's a cleanup crew, but Reed isn't stupid. He was one of the best operators I ever saw. He wouldn't just take orders from the man who let his brother die." "Unless he doesn't know," Emily said, her voice tight. "Briggs is an intelligence officer, Captain. His entire career is built on the art of the lie. He could have convinced Reed that the intel failure came from somewhere else, from the contractor he already killed. He could have framed someone else for the massacre in Syria." Walker stopped near a row of Humvees using the heavy vehicles for cover. "The contractor," he whispered. "The man Reed killed 3 weeks ago. His name was Miller. He was a low-level logistics guy. He didn't have the clearance to bury a report. He could only have seen it happen. So Reed is killing the people who saw Briggs do it," Emily concluded. "He's not hunting the guilty, he's hunting the evidence, and he thinks he's doing justice because Briggs told him these people were the ones who pulled the rug out from under his team." The sun was higher now, the heat beginning to ripple off the asphalt. The base was waking up, the sounds of shouting NCOs and revving engines providing a mask of normalcy. But for Emily and Walker, the world had been stripped of its mask. They saw the base for what it was, a chessboard where the king was willing to sacrifice every pawn to stay on the board. "I need to get to the JAG office," Walker said, his jaw set. "I have enough now to pull a freeze on Briggs's accounts and travel. If I can get a judge advocate to look at those requisitions you found, we can ground him before he realizes the net is closing." "And what about Reed?" Emily asked. Walker looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of genuine fear in his slate-gray eyes. "If Reed is as good as you say he is, and if he's already in position, then the only person who can stop Lucas Reed is Lucas Reed." He turned to leave but stopped, looking back at the woman in the oil-stained vest. "Carter, go back to the armory, lock the door, don't talk to anyone. If I'm not back in 2 hours, take that green notebook and get off this base. Don't go home. Go to the FBI field office in Las Vegas. Ask for a man named Vance. Tell him Stillwater has gone active." Emily watched him walk away, his figure shrinking against the backdrop of the massive hangars. She felt a profound sense of isolation. For 11 years, she had been a ghost in the machine, a silent observer of the military's power. Now, she was a vital component in a machine that was tearing itself apart. She didn't go back to the armory, not immediately. Instead, she walked toward the communications hub, a low, windowless building guarded by a double layer of fencing. She didn't have the clearance to enter, but she didn't need to. She knew the technician who ran the morning shift, a young, overworked airman named Miller who had a soft spot for the armory lady who had once fixed his jammed personal handgun off the record. She found him smoking a cigarette by the side entrance. "Miller," she said, her voice breathless. "Hey, Carter, you're up early. Something wrong with the racks?" "I need a favor," she said, stepping into his personal space, her voice a low, urgent hum. "I need you to check a transmission log. Just a timestamp and a destination. It's for a requisition I'm tracking." Miller hesitated, looking at the security cameras. "You know I can't do that, Carter. The logs are encrypted." "It's about the TAC-50 adapter," she said, using the truth as a wedge. "The one for Colonel Briggs's office. I think I miscalibrated the specs, and if that rifle goes into the field and fails, it's on my head. I just need to see where the last maintenance update was sent." The mention of Briggs's name worked. Nobody wanted to be the reason a colonel's pet project failed. Miller crushed his cigarette and sighed. 2 minutes, that's all you get." He led her inside, the air-conditioned chill of the server room hitting her like a wall. He tapped a few keys, the blue light of the terminal illuminating his tired face. "Okay, let's see." "Briggs, Nathan. Priority channel Alpha 6. There was a transmission sent 4 hours ago. Encrypted burst." "Destination?" Emily asked, her heart hammering. Miller squinted at the screen. "It didn't go to a base. It went to a private relay in the Spring Mountains, just north of the city." The Spring Mountains. They overlooked the entire valley, including the base and the highway leading into Las Vegas. It was a high-altitude position with lines of sight that stretched for dozens of miles. "Did anything come back?" "A single acknowledgement code," Miller said. "And a set of coordinates." "Wait, that's weird." "What's weird?" "The coordinates. They aren't for the mountains. They are for right here, specifically the Westgate parking lot." Emily felt the world go cold. The Westgate parking lot was where the officers parked their private vehicles. It was where Walker's truck was currently sitting. "Thanks, Miller," she said, already turning to run. "Hey, what about the calibration?" Miller called out, but she was already through the door. She ran. She didn't care who saw her. She didn't care about the rules or the invisibility she had cultivated for over a decade. She ran toward the West Gate, her lungs burning in the dry desert air. She had to find Walker. She had to tell him that the coordinates had been sent. The target wasn't Briggs. The target wasn't a witness. The target was the investigation itself. She reached the parking lot just as Walker was opening the door to his black SUV. He was distracted, looking at his phone, likely trying to secure the meeting with the JAG officer. "Walker!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Walker, get away from the car!" He looked up, confused, his hand still on the door handle. In that moment, the world seemed to slow down. Emily saw the sun glinting off something high in the distance, a tiny, diamond-bright spark on the ridgeline of the mountains miles away. She didn't hear the shot. At that distance, the bullet travels much faster than the sound of its own birth. The passenger side window of the SUV shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. Walker was thrown backward by the sheer kinetic energy of the impact, not because he was hit, but because the .50 caliber round had punched through the engine block of his vehicle with the force of a freight train. The car groaned, metal shrieking as the heavy projectile tore through the cast iron and exited through the rear tire, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. Walker scrambled backward, hitting the pavement and rolling behind the cover of a nearby concrete barrier. Emily dove behind a row of trash bins, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The silence that followed was absolute. No sirens, no shouting. Just the wind and the ticking of the dying car engine. "Carter," Walker yelled from behind the barrier. "Are you hit?" "I'm fine," she screamed back. "It came from the mountains. He's in the mountains, Walker." "That's 4 miles away," Walker shouted. "Nobody can hit a moving car from 4 miles. He didn't hit the car by accident." Emily yelled, her mind working through the ballistics. "He hit the engine. He's disabling us. He's not trying to kill you yet. He's pinning you down." She looked at the car. The bullet had struck the exact center of the engine block. At 4 miles, that was like hitting a postage stamp on a moving train. It was impossible. It was a feat of godlike precision, and then she realized why. Lucas Reed wasn't just a sniper. He was a man who had been given the wrong coordinates. He was being told that Walker was the man responsible for the Syria massacre. Briggs was the one feeding him the data. Briggs was the one who had sent the burst transmission with the coordinates of the parking lot. "Walker," she called out. "He thinks you're the one. Briggs told him you killed his team." Walker didn't respond. He was looking at the mountains, his face a mask of grim realization. He knew he couldn't outrun a man who could hit an engine block from another ZIP code. "I have to talk to him," Emily said, her voice rising with a desperate idea. "He knows me, he knows my work. If I can get to a radio, if I can patch into the relay Briggs used, you'll be dead before you reach the building." Walker snapped. "He's got the whole lot covered." Emily looked at her green notebook lying in the dirt where she had dropped it. She looked at the hole in the SUV, a perfectly round, jagged entry point that spoke of a weapon she had helped create. She felt a surge of fury that overrode her fear. She was tired of being the invisible technician. She was tired of watching good men die because bad men held the pens. "He's not a murderer, Walker," she said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce growl. "He's a soldier who's been lied to, and I'm the only one who can show him the math." She looked at the distance between the trash bins and the security shack 50 yards away. The shack had a high-output radio. If she could reach it, she could broadcast on the Alpha 6 channel. "On my signal," she whispered. "Carter, don't." But she was already moving. She didn't run like a soldier. She ran like a woman who had spent her life measuring the world in inches. She moved with a jagged, unpredictable rhythm, weaving between the cars, her eyes fixed on the shack. In the distance, the diamond-bright spark flashed again. The pavement 6 inches from her foot erupted in a geyser of sparks and stone. The shockwave of the bullet passing by felt like a physical blow, knocking her sideways. She scrambled to her feet, her heart roaring in her ears. Another flash. The side of a parked truck exploded, the metal peeling back like paper. He was ranging her. He was telling her to stop. She reached the shack and threw herself through the door, crashing onto the linoleum floor. The security guard was gone, likely fled at the sound of the first impact. She scrambled for the radio, her fingers trembling as she dialed in the frequency she had seen on Miller's screen. "Staff Sergeant Reed," she screamed into the handheld mic. "Lucas, it's Carter from the armory." Static hissed back at her. The mountain was a wall of silence. "Lucas, listen to me. I built that adapter. I know the tolerances. I know how you're making the shot, but you're shooting at the wrong man." She waited, her breath hitching in her throat. The radio crackled. A voice, cold and hollow as a mountain cave, came through the speaker. "The math doesn't lie, Carter. The logs say Walker buried the report. The logs say Walker signed the order." "The logs were faked, Lucas," she yelled. "Briggs signed them. I found the raw data. He used a ghost unit, Delta 7 Sierra. He's the one who let Brooks die. He's using you to kill the man who's investigating him." There was a long, agonizing silence. Emily could almost feel the man on the mountain, his finger hovering over the trigger, his mind processing the variable she had just introduced into his world. "Prove it," the voice said. "Check the serial number on your trigger assembly," Emily shouted. "I etched a hidden mark on the inside of the housing. It's a date. October 14th, that's the day Briggs was promoted. He had that rifle built as a trophy before he gave it to you. Walker wasn't even on the base that day. He was in D.C., testifying about the ambush." The silence stretched for 10 seconds, 20, 30, then the radio clicked. "Go to the colonel's office," Reed said. "Tell him I'm coming and tell him there is no danger space anymore." The line went dead. Emily slumped against the wall, the radio falling from her hand. She looked out the window of the shack. Walker was standing up, his weapon lowered, looking at the mountains. The spark was gone. The desert was empty. 2 hours later, the base was in a state of total lockdown. But it wasn't the guards who found Colonel Nathan Briggs. It was Emily and Walker. They walked into his office, the air-conditioned luxury of the room feeling like a tomb. Briggs was sitting behind his desk, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking out the window at the distant peaks. He didn't look surprised to see them. He looked bored. "You're a hard man to kill, Captain," Briggs said, not turning around. "And you, Miss Carter, I should have paid more attention to the help." "It's over, Nathan," Walker said, his voice cold. "The JAG has the files. The FBI is at the gate. There's nowhere left to run." Briggs smiled, a thin, cruel twist of the lips. "Run? Why would I run? I have the highest clearance on this base. I have the ear of the Pentagon. You have a green notebook and a rogue sniper who will be dead by sunset." "He's not coming for us," Emily said, stepping forward. Briggs finally turned, his eyes narrowing. "What?" "He knows," she said, "and he's much closer than the mountains." As if on cue, the heavy, reinforced glass of the colonel's window shivered. A tiny spiderweb crack appeared in the center of the pane. There was no sound, no flash. just a hole the size of a finger perfectly centered in the glass. Briggs looked at the hole. He looked at the red dot that suddenly appeared on his chest, dancing over his heart. He looked at Emily, his face finally draining of color. "How?" he whispered. He was 4 miles away. "He moved," Emily said, her voice steady. "He's been moving since I talked to him. And he doesn't miss, Colonel. You should know you gave him the rifle." Walker stepped back, pulling Emily with him. They walked out of the office, closing the heavy doors behind them. They didn't look back when the sound of the glass finally shattering echoed through the hallway. They didn't look back when the sirens finally began to wail. In the end, it wasn't the army that brought down Nathan Briggs. It wasn't the law. It was the math. The cold, uncompromising reality of a bullet traveling through the air, accounting for every lie, every error, and every betrayal. Emily Carter went back to her armory the next day. She sat at her bench and picked up a Bohr brush. She looked at her green notebook, now a piece of evidence in a global scandal, and she realized that she was no longer invisible. She was the woman who had solved the impossible shot. And somewhere out there in the vast, shifting sands of the desert, a man named Lucas Reed was still moving. He had no unit. He had no orders. But he had a rifle that was perfectly calibrated, and he had a world that was finally starting to make sense. As Emily cleaned the barrel of a new TAC-50, she felt the hum of the bass, the rhythm of the machines, and the steady beat of her own heart. She knew that the world was a chaotic, dangerous place. But she also knew that as long as there were people who cared about the details, as long as there were people who refused to ignore the small errors, there was a chance for justice. She looked at her hands. They were clean. And this time she knew exactly why. The weight of the silence that followed Walker's revelation was heavy, thick with the kind of realization that shifts the axis of a room. Walker looked at Emily for exactly 2 seconds, his gaze unblinking and hard, as if he were trying to see if she could handle the truth of the name he had just uttered. Briggs. The name hung between them like a physical barrier. The silence wasn't the tentative, searching quiet of 2 people trying to solve a puzzle anymore. It was the grim, settled silence of 2 people who had just looked into the abyss and realized the abyss was looking back at them. It was the silence of understanding what this meant for the chain of command, for the military, and for the man currently hiding somewhere in the wilderness with a rifle designed to rewrite the laws of physics. Emily exhaled slowly, her mind already cataloging the implications. She understood now why the official channels had gone dark. So Reed stopped trying to go through the proper avenues, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. 6 months ago, he simply vanished from the base. It was a clean break, a ghosting that shouldn't have been possible for a man of his profile. There was no formal AWOL filing for 3 weeks because his commanding officer, a man who likely respected Reed too much to suspect him of desertion, assumed he was on emergency family leave. By the time the bureaucracy finally churned through the paperwork and realized he was genuinely gone, he had a 3-week head start on the world. Walker picked up his coffee again, though he didn't drink. His eyes were fixed on the far wall. And then 3 weeks ago, he continued, his voice low. A man connected to the Syria operation died from a single rifle round. It happened at a distance our analysts initially called physically impossible. They said it was a fluke, a freak occurrence of nature that couldn't be replicated. Emily thought about what she had found in her ballistic modeling software the night before. She remembered the cold glow of the monitor in her dark apartment, the way the numbers had scrolled across the screen like a death sentence. She thought about the specific number she had arrived at after 3 grueling hours of calculation, the number that had made her sit back from her computer, her hands trembling slightly, and stare at the wall until the sun began to rise. "It's not impossible," she said quietly, her voice firm with the certainty of someone who trusts math more than people. Walker looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I ran the numbers last night," she continued. "I did the full atmospheric modeling. I applied the Coriolis correction for the Earth's rotation, calculated the spin drift, and accounted for the aerodynamic drag coefficients for the 50 BMG at extreme range." She paused, letting the technicality of the words ground her. "It's at the absolute outer limit of what physics allows. Every single variable has to align perfectly. The air density, the wind cycles, the temperature of the barrel. The shooter has to be singular, not just elite, but genuinely one in a generation. And the weapon has to be perfect." She glanced at her green notebook, the one that held the secrets of 1,000 rifles. "But it's not impossible, it's extraordinary, and Lucas Reed is an extraordinary shooter." Walker set his coffee down again and didn't pick it up. The sound of the ceramic hitting the table was final. "You're certain," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand for confirmation. "I'm certain that the physics permitted under the perfect conditions," she replied. "Whether those conditions existed at the exact moment of the shot, I can't tell you without knowing the precise location of the shooter and the atmospheric data at that specific point in time." "We have the location," Walker said, his voice dropping an octave, "and we have the atmospheric data." Emily blinked, her analytical mind stuttering for a second. "Then why haven't your analysts confirmed it?" "Because our analysts are telling me it's impossible," Walker said, his frustration finally showing in the tight line of his jaw. "They are looking at the manuals, and the manuals say the bullet should have dropped or drifted beyond recovery." "Then your analysts are wrong," she said. She didn't say it aggressively. She didn't say it to prove she was smarter than the men in the high-rise offices at the Pentagon. She said it simply because it was true. In Emily's world, facts weren't emotional. They were just the floor you stood on. She had never seen any value in softening the truth, especially not when precision was the only thing that could prevent another body from dropping. Walker stared at her for a long time, searching her face for any hint of doubt. When he found none, something shifted in his expression. It wasn't quite a smile. It was more like the grim acknowledgement of a general who had finally found the right weapon. "Carter, I need you on this investigation." "I'm a weapons technician," she reminded him, though she already knew it wouldn't matter. "I belong in the armory, not in a field office." "You're the only person who has run the correct numbers and reached the correct conclusion," he countered. "And you have a connection to the weapon that I cannot replicate anywhere else. You built part of it. You modified that bolt assembly. You understand the soul of that rifle in a way that no ballistic analyst on my team ever will." He paused, leaning forward. "I need someone who can tell me what Reed is capable of. And more importantly, I need someone who can tell me what he's planning to do next." Emily looked at him, her mind racing. She thought about the question she had written at 4 in the morning, the one that had haunted her while she brewed her first pot of coffee. If Lucas Reed is going to fire again, who is the target? Beneath it, she had written a single name. "I think I already know what he's planning to do next," she said. Walker went very still. The air in the room seemed to freeze. "Tell me." "Briggs," she said, the name feeling like lead in her mouth. "Everything traces back to Briggs. The man who died 3 weeks ago was a contractor with connections to the Syria operation. He was a peripheral figure, a witness, someone who knew what happened but wasn't the one who gave the order." She paused, her eyes narrowing as she visualized the trajectory of a man's life. Reed didn't make that shot to end things. He made it to prove something. He was shouting into the wind, showing the people who ignored him that he was still there and that he was capable of reaching out and touching them from miles away. It was a demonstration, a test fire. The real target is Briggs. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Emily counted them by the beat of her own heart. "If you're right," Walker said slowly, "then Reed has already selected a position. He's already done the atmospheric analysis for the final target. He already knows where Briggs will be and when. He's not hunting anymore. He's waiting. That's how a sniper thinks," she said. "You don't select a target and then scramble to find a position. You find the position first. You work backward from the geometry of the terrain. You figure out every variable, the sun's position at the time of the engagement, the likely wind tunnels created by buildings or valleys before you ever commit to the kill." She looked at Walker with a growing sense of urgency. "If Reed is planning this, and I believe he is, he's been planning it for months. He's not improvising. He's executing a masterwork." Walker was already reaching for his phone, his movements sharp and decisive. "Carter," he said, "I need you to come with me right now. We don't have time for a formal transfer." She didn't hesitate. She picked up her green notebook and tucked it into her pocket. "Where are we going?" "To find out where Briggs is going to be in the next 30 days, Walker said, "because that's where Lucas Reed is right now." They moved with a speed that Emily wasn't used to. In the armory, everything was slow and deliberate. In Walker's world, time was a resource that was constantly running out. Walker made 3 calls in the truck on the way to the secure briefing facility on the east side of the base, his voice clipped and commanding. Emily sat in the passenger seat with her notebook open on her knee, her pen flying across the paper as she wrote down variables. She wasn't writing down her feelings or her speculations. She was writing down physics. She was thinking about what the geometry of the situation made inevitable. The briefing facility was a low, nondescript building with no windows on the exterior. It was the kind of place that didn't announce its existence, designed to blend into the background of the sprawling military complex. Inside, The air was cool and smelled of ozone and floor wax. Two of Walker's team members were already waiting in a room filled with flickering monitors and topographic maps. Emily didn't recognize either of them. They looked at her the way military personnel always looked at her, with a mixture of curiosity and the subtle assessment that happens when a civilian enters a restricted space. Walker didn't bother with introductions. He just said, "She's with me," and moved past them to the central table where a laptop was open, displaying a high-resolution map of Europe. "Where is Briggs?" One of the men, a younger officer with dark hair and the precise, economical movements of a high-tier operator, pulled up a document on a secondary screen. "Colonel Briggs is scheduled to attend a NATO security conference in Geneva, Switzerland. It starts in 2 weeks. It's a 4-day event ending with a formal dinner at a hilltop conference center just outside the city." Emily leaned over the map. Her eyes moved without her consciously directing them, seeking out elevation, seeking distance, seeking the perfect geometry for a long-range shot. It was a reflex now, a byproduct of a decade spent looking at the world through the lens of ballistics. "Show me the elevation profile around that conference center," she said. The two men looked at Walker, waiting for his approval. He nodded once. The topographic map bloomed across the screen, showing the jagged peaks and deep valleys of the Swiss landscape. Emily leaned forward, her face inches from the glass. She studied it for exactly 45 seconds, her mind running 1,000 simulations. "There," she said, pointing to a sharp ridgeline approximately 4 kilometers to the north of the conference center. "If I were selecting the position for a 4,000-meter shot at a target on that building's exterior dining terrace, that ridge is the only choice. It gives you the elevation advantage, a clear line of sight, and enough natural concealment to hide a man for days. The atmospheric conditions at that altitude in this season will produce consistent low-wind corridors in the early morning or late evening." She looked up at Walker. "If Reed is targeting Briggs at that conference, he's already on that ridge, or he's on his way there right now." The younger man spoke up, his voice skeptical. "You said 4,000 meters. The previous shot in Syria was 3,847. That was already a world record. You're saying he's going to push it even further? 4,120 meters, Emily corrected him without looking away from the map. "That's the distance from that ridge line to the exterior terrace. I'm estimating from the scale, but the error margin is minimal." She paused, her voice taking on a hollow quality. "Lucas Reed is not going to make a shot at anything less than his maximum possible distance. He's going to push the rifle to the point of failure. He's going to make a shot that no one believes is possible, because that's the point. That's always been the point." She looked at the men around the table, her eyes intense. "He's not just trying to kill Briggs. He's trying to make the act so undeniably, historically extraordinary that the world is forced to ask why. He wants the investigation to be so high-profile that someone eventually has to uncover what Briggs did in Syria. He's using a bullet to write a headline." The room was silent. Even the hum of the computers seemed to fade. Walker was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, something caught between professional respect and genuine alarm. "She's right," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Then to Emily, "How long do we have?" "If he's already selected the position," she said, "then he's already there. He'll need days to acclimate to the elevation. He'll need to gather atmospheric data at that specific location at every hour of the day. He'll be calibrating his equipment for the exact density of the Swiss air." She paused. "We have maybe 10 days, possibly 8 if he's already settled in. We move tonight," Walker said. Captain, the second man at the table, spoke for the first time. He was older, with gray at his temples and the steady bearing of someone who had seen too many missions go sideways. "This is a significant resource commitment based on," he glanced at Emily, his eyes skeptical, "based on the analysis of a civilian technician." Emily didn't react. She had spent 11 years being the only civilian in the room. She had stopped caring about the lack of a uniform a long time ago. Walker, however, didn't let it slide. He didn't even look at the man when he answered. "Her analysis is the first correct analysis I've received on this case. Every other expert told me the Syria shot was a fluke. She's the only one who showed me the math that says it wasn't. We move tonight." The gray-templed man said nothing else. He simply turned back to his console and began the process of mobilizing. What happened over the next 6 hours was a blur of controlled, precise chaos. Emily had heard about the speed at which special units could move, but witnessing it was something else entirely. Logistics were handled in minutes. Transport was secured. Documentation was processed through channels she didn't even know existed. She was handed a temporary investigative clearance, a thick stack of papers that she signed without reading every line. Normally, she was meticulous with paperwork, but Walker was standing next to her, and the gravity of the situation had reached a point where reading the fine print felt like a luxury for a different life. She was allowed to go back to her quarters for exactly 20 minutes to pack. She stood in her small, neat apartment and felt like a stranger. Everything was in its place: the books on ballistics, the spare rifle parts, the jars of cleaning solvent. It was the life of a technician, and now she was stepping out of it. She put her green notebook in the left pocket of her tactical vest. She packed 2 changes of clothes and her high-end laptop. She didn't look back when she closed the door. The transport plane was a military beast, loud, cold, and uncomfortable. The interior was a cavern of exposed wires and metal webbing. Walker sat beside her as they leveled off over the Atlantic, the roar of the engines making conversation difficult. He used the time to brief her on the man she was helping him hunt. He spoke in the precise, factual language of a military dossier, but Emily could hear the underlying tone of reluctant respect. Lucas Reed was 34 years old. He had enlisted at 19 and worked his way through the most grueling training the military had to offer. Ranger school at 22, sniper training at 24. He had set qualification records that still stood today, marks that new recruits were told were unreachable. 8 deployments, 14 confirmed long-range kills, all within the rules of engagement. 0 disciplinary actions in 12 years of service. Tyler Brooks had been his spotter for 4 years, Walker explained. They had met during sniper school and had been assigned together for their first deployment. By all accounts, they became the kind of partnership that the military occasionally produces and almost never fully understands. 2 people so precisely calibrated to each other that they functioned as a single instrument. One saw the world, the other touched it. After Brooks died, Walker said, Reed's commanding officer flagged his mental state as a concern within 48 hours. He was assigned a mandatory psychological evaluation. He passed it with flying colors. Walker paused, looking out at the dark interior of the plane. Whatever he was carrying, he kept it below the threshold the evaluation was looking for. He knew the right answers to give. He knew how to hide it, Emily said. Or he had genuinely convinced himself he was still functional. In his mind, his function had simply changed. Walker nodded. Those aren't always the same thing. Emily thought about that. She thought about what it would be like to be a man whose entire existence was built on the elimination of variables. A man who lived for perfect preparation and perfect outcomes. And then to have all of that undone in a single night, not by a failure of skill, not by a mistake on the battlefield, but by the cold negligence of a man in an office thousands of miles away. A failure of the system, a piece of paper that wasn't passed down. He filed reports for 2 months, she said, her voice barely audible over the engines. He tried to get someone to acknowledge what happened. Yes, Walker said, and every time he was shut down. And the last time Briggs personally signed the closure notice. Yes. Emily looked out the small, oval window at the dark sky. When Reed got that notice, she said, What did he do? What did he do that day specifically? Walker looked at her, curious. Why does that matter? Because I want to understand the state of his mind, she said. I need to know if the decision to do this was made in a moment of white-hot rage, or if it was made with the same cold, deliberate clarity he uses for everything else. Walker was quiet for a moment, recalling the reports. According to his commanding officer, who spoke to him that afternoon, he said nothing. He read the notice, folded it carefully, and put it in his pocket. He thanked his CO for his time and left. The CO described him as completely calm. 2 weeks later, he was gone. Emily turned back from the window. Completely calm, she repeated. 2 weeks to prepare. Then he vanished. That wasn't rage. That was a man executing a plan. He had decided with full clarity that if the system would not deliver justice, he would become the system himself. He would do it in a way that no one could ignore. Somewhere ahead of them, in the dark, frozen peaks of the Alps, that man was lying behind a rifle she had helped maintain. He was gathering data. He was waiting for the wind to tell him when it was time. Emily opened her green notebook to the page with Briggs's name at the bottom. She picked up her pen and wrote one more line under it. Asterisk, he's already there. Asterisk 30,000 feet below, the Atlantic was a black void. The transport plane hit a pocket of turbulence, shaking the heavy metal frame. Emily held her notebook in both hands, her knuckles white. She thought about the 26-year-old man who had died in a valley in Syria. Tyler Brooks. He had a 7-month-old daughter who would grow up without ever knowing his voice. He had died because a colonel had looked at a classified report and decided that his own reputation was more important than the lives of the men on the ground. She thought about what Walker had said earlier. Asterisk, this is above my pay grade and yours. Asterisk, she thought about the adapter she had built with her own hands. She remembered the smell of the metal shavings, the feel of the micrometer as she checked the tolerances. She had believed she was helping a soldier do his job. Instead, she had helped build a tool for a ghost. She didn't know how to feel about that. As a technician, she was supposed to be objective. She dealt in facts, measurements, and calibrations. But she was also a person who had spent 11 years watching things go wrong and recording them in a green notebook because no one had ever asked her to stop. Now, someone was asking her to help stop something that was, depending on your perspective, either a terrible crime or the only form of justice left on the table. The transport began its descent as the first gray light of dawn appeared on the horizon. Walker's voice came from beside her, quiet and direct. Carter, when we land, we have 6 hours before the advance team reaches the ridge. I need you ready to tell them exactly where to look. She closed the notebook with a soft thud. I'm ready, she said, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if she was telling the truth. They landed in Geneva at 6:42 in the morning. The cold hit Emily the moment the transport doors hissed open. It wasn't the dry, searing cold of the Nevada desert she was used to. This was different, wet, heavy, and biting. It was the kind of cold that settled into your bones and refused to leave. She pulled her jacket tighter, the fabric stiff in the mountain air, and followed Walker across the tarmac. Walker didn't break stride for anything, and Emily had decided somewhere over the ocean that she wasn't going to be the reason he had to. The advance team was already on the ground. There were 4 of them, all in civilian clothing that managed to look entirely too functional to be ordinary. They had the particular stillness of people who were trained to be invisible while seeing everything. Walker spoke to their team lead, a man named Martinez, for 90 seconds. Emily stood slightly apart, her eyes fixed on the mountains that loomed in the distance. They were gray, enormous, and indifferent. Somewhere on those slopes, a man was holding a wind gauge, his fingers likely numb, his mind focused on the density of the air. He's been here for days, she thought. He's acclimated to the altitude. He knows every wind shift on that mountain by heart now. Walker turned back to her, his face grim. The conference center is 40 minutes east. Briggs arrives in 5 days for pre-conference briefings. The formal dinner, the event with the best line of sight from the northern ridge, is in 9 days. 9 days, she repeated. Does that change your assessment? Walker asked. She thought about the math. 9 days was an eternity for a man like Reed. It was enough time to build a complete atmospheric profile of the entire valley. It was enough time to calibrate the rifle for every possible temperature variation. By the time Briggs stepped onto that terrace, pulling the trigger would be almost mechanical for Reed. No, she said. It doesn't change anything. It confirms it. He's been on that ridge for at least 4 days already. Maybe 6. Walker looked at her for a moment, then turned to Martinez. We go to the ridge first, before the conference center. Martinez didn't question the order. He simply nodded and started moving toward a pair of unassuming subs. They drove east in silence. Emily sat in the back of the lead car with Walker and a woman named Reyes, who handled communications. Reyes was monitoring 3 different devices simultaneously, her eyes flicking between screens with a speed that Emily respected. Efficiency was a universal language. Tell me about the ridge, Walker said as the city gave way to the rising slopes of the Alps. Elevation is approximately 1,400 meters above the conference center's position, Emily said, pulling up the topographic data on her tablet. The northern face has a series of natural rock formations that break up the silhouette. That's the first thing a sniper looks for, something to hide the outline of the human body. The wind at that elevation in this season runs predominantly from the northwest at between 3 and 7 knots in the early morning. That's the optimal firing window. She traced a line on the screen. There's a natural depression in the rock face about 2/3 of the way up. It's sheltered from the primary wind gusts and provides a clear, unobstructed line of sight to the terrace. That's where I'd be. How confident are you? Walker asked. 75%, she said. The other 25 is for variables I can't see from a satellite map. But even if I'm wrong about the exact spot, I'm right about the area within 200 meters. That's enough, Walker said. Reyes looked up from her monitors, her expression tightening. "Captain, I'm getting something." The tone of her voice made the hair on the back of Emily's neck stand up. It was the sound of a theory becoming a reality. "Thermal imaging from the drone the Swiss team launched 40 minutes ago," Reyes said. "Northern Ridge, 1,400-meter elevation." She paused for a second. "Single heat signature. It's stationary. It's been stationary for the duration of the flight." Nobody spoke for 3 full seconds. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the mountain road. "He's there," Walker said quietly. Emily had known it. She had calculated it. She had written it in her notebook. But hearing it confirmed by a thermal signature, a living human being perched on a cliff with a weapon of her own making, was different. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. "What's the protocol?" she asked. "We approach," Walker said. "We establish contact. We do not go in with weapons drawn unless he fires first. This man is a United States soldier. He gets every opportunity to stand down. He has a weapon that can kill us before we even see him," Martinez said from the front seat. "He also has a name," Walker shot back, "and a reason." They stopped the vehicles 2 kilometers from the base of the ridge. The rest of the way would be on foot. Emily went with them because Walker didn't tell her to stay, and because she wasn't the kind of person who could wait in a car while the end of the story was being written. The climb was brutal. Emily was in good shape, but the Swiss mountains didn't care about her morning runs in Nevada. The air was thin, and the terrain was a treacherous mix of loose rock and frozen earth. Martinez took the point, his movements fluid and silent. Walker stayed close to Emily, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgeline above them. Reyes trailed behind, still tethered to her drone feed. At the 40-minute mark, Martinez stopped and raised a fist. The group froze. He turned back and mouthed 2 words, *visual contact. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She moved up beside Walker, crouching low behind a jagged outcrop of rock. He pointed toward a depression in the cliffside about 50 meters ahead. There he was. Lucas Reed was exactly where she had predicted he would be. He was lying in a shallow bowl of rock, his body perfectly still. He was dressed in full cold-weather tactical gear, the muted grays and browns of his clothing blending seamlessly into the stone. He was oriented toward the valley below, his rifle mounted on a low-profile bipod. Seeing him like that, not as a name on a file, but as a man, changed everything. He looked small against the vastness of the mountains, yet he possessed a presence that seemed to radiate outward. He was the center of a very dangerous circle. Walker took a deep breath, preparing to speak, but Emily touched his arm. "Wait," she whispered. She looked at the rifle. Even from this distance, she could see the custom bolt assembly she had worked on. She could see the way the barrel was threaded, the way the scope was mounted with agonizing precision. It was her work. It was her contribution to the world, currently being used to hunt a man. Reed didn't move. He didn't even seem to be breathing. He was a statue made of salt and iron. Walker stood up slowly, his hands held away from his sides. "Lucas," he called out. His voice echoed off the rock walls, sounding thin in the cold air. "Lucas Reed, this is Captain Walker." Reed didn't flinch. He didn't turn around. He stayed focused on the valley, on the target that hadn't even arrived yet. "We know why you're here, Lucas," Walker shouted. "We know about Syria. We know about Brooks. We know what Briggs did." At the mention of his partner's name, Reed's shoulders shifted, just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough to see. "It's over, Lucas," Walker said, taking a step forward. "You've made your point. The shot in Syria, everyone knows. The math is out there. You've proven what happened. You don't have to do this." Finally, Reed moved. He didn't stand up. He simply rolled onto his side, keeping his body low, and looked back at them. His face was gaunt, his eyes rimmed with the red of exhaustion and cold. He looked like a man who had already died and was just waiting for his body to realize it. He didn't look at Walker. He looked at Emily. He looked at the woman who knew his rifle better than he did. He looked at the person who had traced his ghost across 2 continents. "The math isn't enough," Reed said. His voice was raspy, unused to speech. "People forget math. They don't forget this." He looked back toward the valley, toward the distant speck of the conference center. "Briggs signed the paper," Reed said. "He signed it and he went to dinner. Tyler died in the dirt and Briggs went to dinner." Walker took another step. "We can handle Briggs, Lucas. We can bring him to a tribunal. We have the evidence now. Carter here, she found it. She's the one who proved you were right." Reed's gaze flicked back to Emily. "You built the adapter," he said. Emily felt a lump in her throat. "I did. I thought it was for a legitimate operation." "It was," Reed said. "The most legitimate one I've ever been on." He turned back to his rifle, his hand resting gently on the stock. It was a gesture of affection, almost a caress. He wasn't a madman. He wasn't a terrorist. He was a man who had been told his life and the lives of his friends didn't matter, and he had decided to prove the world wrong. Lucas, don't, Walker said, his hand moving toward his holster, though he didn't draw. Reed looked at him one last time. There was no malice in his eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. I'm not going to fire, Captain. Walker paused. Then stand down. Come with us. I'm not going to fire, Reed repeated. Because I've already done the work. The data is all here. He patted a small, weathered notebook that lay beside him on the rock. It was identical to Emily's, though its pages were stained with dirt and sweat. Everything is in there, Reed said. The calculations, the witness statements I gathered, the proof of the cover-up. If I die here, you take that book. You're the only one who can read it anyway, aren't you, Carter? Emily stepped forward, ignoring Walker's restraining hand. Why are you telling us this? Because I can't win, Reed said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I'm one man on a ridge, but the rifle is a witness. Suddenly, the air was shattered by the high-pitched whine of a high-performance engine. A second drone, larger and more aggressive than the one Reyes was operating, swept over the ridge line. Walker's radio exploded with chatter. Captain, we have an unauthorized intercept. Swiss security forces or... Wait, that's not Swiss. A red dot appeared on Reed's chest. Walker didn't hesitate. He tackled Emily, slamming her into the hard ground just as a shot rang out, not from Reed's rifle, but from the hovering drone. The rock where they had been standing disintegrated into dust. Get down, Walker screamed. The world turned into a blur of noise and smoke. Martinez and Reyes were returning fire, their handguns useless against the armored drone. Reed hadn't moved. He was still lying by his rifle, looking up at the machine that had come to silence him. He knew, Emily realized as she pressed her face into the freezing dirt. He knew they would come for him. He didn't want to kill Briggs. He wanted to draw them out. He wanted to force the shadow into the light. Reed reached for his notebook, his fingers clawing at the rock. Another burst of fire from the drone stitched a line across the ridge. Emily saw the notebook sliding toward the edge of the depression. She didn't think. She didn't calculate the variables or the risks. She scrambled forward, her hands scraping against the stones, and lunged for the small, leather-bound book. Carter, no, Walker yelled. She felt the heat of a bullet pass inches from her shoulder. Her fingers closed around the notebook just as Reed looked at her. He didn't try to stop her. He just nodded once. The drone pivoted, its sensor array locking onto Emily. She was a civilian. She was a witness. She was a variable that needed to be eliminated. Then a sound like a thunderclap shook the entire mountain. It was the 50 BMG. Reed had fired, but he hadn't fired at the valley. He had tilted the rifle upward, the massive barrel roaring as it sent a round straight into the drone's camera housing. The machine shuddered, sparks flying from its optics, and veered wildly into the cliff face, exploding in a ball of orange flame. The silence that followed was absolute. Emily looked up, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Reed was slumped over his rifle. The recoil of the massive weapon, fired from such an awkward angle, had thrown him back against the rock. Walker was on his feet in a second, rushing to Reed's side. Martinez and Reyes followed, their weapons raised, scanning the sky for more threats. Emily sat on the ground, clutching the notebook to her chest. Her hands were covered in soot and blood, but she didn't let go. She looked at the man who had just saved her life with a rifle she had helped build. Walker knelt beside Reed, checking his pulse. He's alive, he called out, his voice thick with relief. But he's hurt. We need a medevac now. Reyes was already on the radio, her voice sharp and commanding. Emily looked down at the notebook in her hands. She opened the first page. It wasn't just math. It was a journal. It was a record of every day since the valley in Syria. It was a map of a man's soul, written in the language of ballistics and grief. She looked at Walker, who was holding a bandage to Reed's side. He looked at her, his eyes landing on the book. Is it all there? He asked. Emily flipped through the pages. She saw names, dates, coordinates. She saw the truth of what had happened, hidden behind the geometry of a long-range shot. Yes, she said, her voice finally steady. It's all here. She looked at the mountain, at the vast, indifferent peaks that had watched this play out. She thought about the green notebook in her own pocket and the one she now held in her hand. For 11 years, she had been a technician. She had been someone who watched from the sidelines, recording the world's errors in silent ink. But as the sound of the rescue helicopter began to throb in the distance, Emily Carter knew that her time as a technician was over. She was a witness now, and like Lucas Reed, she was going to make sure the world listened. The cold was still there, biting and relentless, but as she stood up, Emily didn't feel it anymore. She felt the weight of the truth. It was heavier than any rifle, more precise than any calculation. And for the first time in her life, she knew exactly what to do with it. The wind across the ridge did not just blow, it searched. It found every gap in a jacket, every exposed inch of skin, and every hairline fracture in a person's resolve. At 4,000 meters above sea level, the air was thin, transparent, and tasted of ancient ice. To the north-northeast, the valley stretched out like a topographical map come to life, a sprawling tapestry of shadow and light where the Swiss peaks met the gathering clouds. And there, tucked into a natural depression in the rock, was Staff Sergeant Lucas Reed. He was so still he might have been part of the mountain itself. The rifle was assembled and positioned with surgical precision, its long barrel tracking toward the valley below. He had not moved since Ethan Walker and Emily Carter had arrived on the ridge. He knew they were there, of course. A man like Reed did not simply exist in an environment. He colonized it. Emily understood the depth of that stillness before Walker ever said a word. A man like Reed had spent a career in places exactly like this, lying motionless for hours, reading the environment through senses trained to a level most people couldn't imagine. He processed information differently. The shift in the wind's pitch, the subtle vibration of boots on granite, the change in the thermal signature of the air as human bodies approached. He had known they were there for at least 10 minutes, and yet he hadn't flinched. He hadn't raised his weapon to find them in his optics. He was simply waiting, a predator who had already accounted for the variables. "Reed," Walker called out. His voice was steady and clear, designed to carry exactly far enough to be heard without echoing across the peaks. It was the voice of a commander who knew how to command space. "Staff Sergeant Lucas Reed. My name is Captain Ethan Walker. I'm coming toward you. I'm unarmed." As he spoke, Walker unclipped his sidearm and handed it to Martinez without looking back. It was a gesture of profound, calculated risk. "I just want to talk," Walker added, his breath blooming in the cold air. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Then Reed's voice came back, and Emily was not prepared for it. She had expected something jagged, perhaps the frantic edge of a man who had been pushed to the brink, or the low growl of a fugitive. Instead, it was quiet and composed. It was the voice of a man who was not panicking, not raging, and certainly not desperate. It was the voice of someone who had long since moved past those volatile emotions into a state of either absolute acceptance or final resolution. At that moment, Emily couldn't tell which was more dangerous. "You brought a lot of people for a conversation," Captain Reed said. "Some of them I could leave behind," Walker replied, his eyes never leaving the spot where Reed lay. "Some of them I couldn't." There was a long pause, the kind that feels like it's stretching the fabric of time. "The woman," Reed said finally, "she's a technician. I recognize her. She worked on my rifle." Emily felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the mountain wind move through her chest. He knew who she was. Of course he did. A man who lived by the precision of his equipment would never forget the hands that touched it. He had stood at her bench in Nevada. He had watched her work with those predatory, observant eyes. He remembered faces the way he remembered wind readings, precisely and permanently. "Her name is Emily Carter," Walker said, bridging the gap between them with information. "She's the one who figured out where you'd be." Another pause followed, longer this time. The wind whistled through the rocks, a lonely, haunting sound. "She's good," Reed said. There was no irony in his voice, no sarcasm or bitterness. It was a straightforward assessment, the same way he might assess the grain weight of a bullet or the elevation of a target. To Reed, competence was simply a fact of the world. Walker took 3 slow steps forward, his boots crunching on the scree. "Lucas, I know why you're here. I know what Briggs did. I know about the report, and I know about Tyler. I know about every closed door you hit for 2 months before you stopped knocking." Walker's voice was careful but not gentle. He wasn't trying to soothe a wounded animal, he was talking to a soldier. He was being direct, refusing to hide behind platitudes. "I need you to talk to me before this goes somewhere it can't come back from." Emily counted the seconds in the ensuing silence. 1, 2, 3. She reached 8 before Reed spoke again. She knew because counting was her default state, the way she made sense of the chaos. "How much do you actually know, Captain?" Reed asked. "Or is this the part where you tell me you understand while your team circles around to flank me?" "Martinez," Walker said, his voice low but firm, never breaking eye contact with the depression in the rocks. "Take the team back down to the tree line." Martinez began to object, his professional instincts screaming against leaving his commander exposed. But Walker turned and looked at him, and whatever was in that look, a mixture of absolute authority and a specific kind of grim certainty, was enough. Martinez stopped talking. He signaled the others, and they began the slow, disciplined retreat down the slope. Reyes hesitated for a fraction of a second, her hand near her weapon. "Raise, go," Walker commanded. She went. Then it was just the three of them. Walker and Emily stood 20 feet from a man with a rifle that could reach out and touch the horizon. Walker looked at Emily, a silent instruction for her to stay put, and then he walked forward alone. He stopped when he was 10 feet from Reed and sat down on a jagged rock as if he were sitting down to have a casual coffee in a quiet cafe. Emily, however, did not stay where she was. She had not traveled 3,000 miles and risked her life and career to stand in the background. She moved forward to 15 feet and sat down on a different rock. She wanted Reed to see her. She wanted to be a person to him, not just a technician or a target. Reed turned his head slowly, looking at her instead of Walker. "You built the adapter on this rifle," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. "Yes," she replied. Her voice felt small against the vastness of the mountain, but she kept it steady. "Did you know what it was for when you built it?" Reed asked. "No," she said. He looked at her for a long, searching moment, his eyes scanning her face for the slightest hint of a lie. "I believe you," he said. He looked back through his scope, and Emily realized with a sharp, clarifying shock that Briggs wasn't even at the conference center yet. The NATO summit was still 5 days away. Reed wasn't aiming at anything in particular. He was lying in position out of habit, out of the bone-deep discipline of a man who had been trained to maintain his post regardless of the circumstances. He wasn't about to pull the trigger on anyone today. He was simply waiting, and now he had people to wait with him. "Tell me about Tyler," Walker said quietly. Reed was silent for a long time, so long that Emily began to fear he would never speak again. She expected him to use tactical language if he did. Operational facts, dates, coordinates. She expected the clipped, detached tone of a military briefing, the kind of language soldiers used to build a wall between themselves and the things they had survived. But when Reed finally spoke, the wall wasn't there. He named his daughter Sophie after his grandmother, Reed said. The words were soft, almost a whisper, but they carried a weight that seemed to anchor him to the ground. He told me that in Kandahar in 2019, we were in a 12-hour hold, pinned in a position where we couldn't move or make a sound. He just leaned over and whispered it to me like it was the most important mission briefing I'd ever receive. Reed paused, his gaze fixed on the distant valley. He said, "Whatever happens, I need someone to know her name, so she exists somewhere outside of just my head." Emily felt something painful shift in her chest. She didn't speak, she barely breathed. "Sophie Brooks," Reed continued. "She was 7 months old when he died. She's 17 months old now. I've thought about that a lot. About how many months I've been counting since he died. About how she keeps getting older and he stays exactly the same age." His voice remained level, but it was a conscious effort, a feat of incredible emotional engineering. He trusted the system, Reed said, and now the tightness Emily had been looking for finally appeared in his tone. He trusted the chain of command. He believed that the people above him were doing their jobs, that the information that needed to move was moving, that the intelligence was being used the way it was supposed to be used. And the man who had the report, the man who sat on it for 6 hours while Tyler walked into a valley that was already burned. That man went to Tyler's memorial service. The wind seemed to die down for a moment, leaving a vacuum that Reed's words filled. "He shook our hands," Reed said, his voice vibrating with a low, controlled intensity. "He looked me in the eye and said Tyler was a hero and that the nation was grateful." Then he stopped. Walker said nothing. He was doing the hardest thing a leader could do in that moment. He was allowing the silence to exist. He wasn't trying to fix it or fill it with empty promises. "I sat with that for a long time," Reed said. "I tried to do it right. 2 months of reports and requests and formal channels, and every single door was slammed in my face. And then Briggs himself signed the notice telling me it was over, that the matter was resolved." Reed took a breath, a sharp intake of frozen air. "I stood in the hallway outside my C.O.'s office holding that notice, and I thought about Tyler's face. I thought about Sophie, who is never going to remember her father's voice. And I thought about Briggs pouring himself a drink somewhere, and I understood something. I understood that the system was not going to fix this. It was specifically designed by the people who benefited from it staying broken to ensure it never would be fixed." "So you decided to fix it yourself?" Walker asked. "I decided to make it impossible to ignore," Reed corrected. "The man I shot 3 weeks ago." He knew he was part of the decision to bury the report. He wasn't going to go to prison. He wasn't going to face charges. Nobody was ever going to touch him. But now people are asking questions. Now there's an investigation that has my name in it, and his name in it, and Briggs's name in it. "That's not nothing, Captain." "No," Walker said, leaning forward slightly. "That's not nothing." Emily watched Reed's shoulders. She watched the way he breathed, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. She saw the way a man who had been living in a rock depression for days on a freezing mountain held himself. What she saw wasn't the jagged edge of madness. It was grief compressed by the immense pressure of injustice into something very dense, very focused, and very sharp. It was a diamond made of sorrow. "Lucas," she said. He turned his head toward her again. "Can I ask you something?" He waited, his expression unreadable. "When you made the shot 3 weeks ago," she said, "the 3,847-meter shot. What were you thinking in the moment? Right before you pulled the trigger?" Reed was quiet for a long time. The question seemed to pull him back to that moment, to the cold reality of the physics he had mastered. "I was thinking about the wind at 800 meters elevation," he said. "There was a shift I hadn't fully accounted for. I had to make a last-second correction." He paused, his eyes narrowing as if seeing the target through the mist of memory. "And then I was thinking about Tyler asking me once, during a qualification exercise, whether I thought there was a distance at which a human being simply ran out of ability, where the physics of the situation exceeded what a person could compensate for. I told him I didn't know, that I'd never found it." He stopped, his hand resting near the bolt of the rifle. "I was thinking that I still haven't found it," he said. The weight of that statement settled over Emily like a physical shroud. She thought about the human cost of that extraordinary feat. A man who had lost his brother in arms, lying on a mountain nearly 4,000 meters from a target, and in the moment of making the most impossible shot in history, his mind was occupied by a conversation with the dead man he was doing it for. It wasn't about the kill, it was about the connection. Walker leaned forward, his voice taking on a new urgency. "Lucas, I need you to hear me. What Briggs did, it's not going to stay buried. I have Carter's documentation. I have the requisition chain. I have the access logs from the intelligence database that show exactly when the report was opened, how long it was viewed, and who was logged into the system." He took a breath. "I have enough to take this forward in a way that Briggs cannot close. Not this time." Reed turned to look at Walker directly. His face was weathered and cracked from the exposure, and his eyes carried the particular kind of exhaustion that didn't come from a lack of sleep, but from carrying a burden for too long without rest. "How long have you had this?" Reed asked. "The documentation. For days," Walker said. "Carter found the first thread the night I talked to her. We've been pulling on it ever since." Reed stared at him, his brow furrowing. "For days," he repeated slowly. The words seemed to taste bitter in his mouth. "For days, and I spent 2 months. I tried everything. Every door closed, and she found it in one night, because she was looking at the right things," Walker said. Reed looked at Emily. For the first time, the absolute, ironclad control of his expression shifted. It was a subtle change, the way a precision instrument might flutter when it encounters a force it wasn't designed to measure. "Why?" he asked. He didn't ask why she looked or why she got involved. He just asked why asterisk. It was the biggest question there was. Emily thought about the adapter she had built with her own hands. She thought about the green notebook she had carried for 11 years, the one filled with the thousands of small discrepancies she had noticed but never had the power to change. She thought about Tyler Brooks, who would never see his daughter grow up, and Sophie, who was 17 months old and counting. "Because someone should have been paying attention earlier," she said, "and I'm sorry they weren't." Reed looked at her for a long time, his eyes searching hers. Then he said very quietly, "So am I." A sudden gust of wind swept across the ridge, the kind of wind that felt like it could strip the skin from bone. None of them moved. Emily sat on that rock, 4,000 meters above the world, and understood that the next 30 seconds would define the rest of their lives. It was the pivot point. It would determine if a soldier went home or vanished into the darkness, and whether a broken system would finally be forced to answer for itself. Walker spoke, his voice cutting through the wind. "Lucas, I need you to make a decision right now. Not tomorrow, not when Briggs arrives. Now." Reed's hand was on the rifle. He wasn't on the trigger, but his fingers were resting near it with a familiarity that was heartbreaking. "If I stand down," he said, "and the charges don't go forward. If Briggs walks and the closure notice stands, and Sophie grows up and nobody is ever held responsible. What then?" "Then we both failed," Walker said, "and we live with that failure together." He paused, letting the weight of that honesty sink in. "But if you fire that rifle, Lucas, if you make that shot, the only story anyone will ever tell is about you. Not about Briggs. Not about Tyler. Not about the report they buried. They'll just talk about the sniper who broke and went rogue and had to be stopped." He leaned in closer. "Don't let Briggs take that from you, too." Don't let him turn your grief into his justification. The wind howled again, but Emily held her breath, ignoring the cold. Reed's hand began to move. It didn't go for the trigger. Slowly, with a deliberate lack of haste, he moved his hand away from the rifle and placed it flat on the cold rock beside him. That small, quiet gesture was the loudest thing Emily had ever witnessed. It was the sound of a war ending. Walker was on his radio instantly, his voice low and controlled. "Martinez, bring the team back up. Slow approach. No weapons visible." He clicked off and looked at Reed. "Thank you," he said. It was simple and direct, devoid of any performative triumph. Reed looked up at the sky for a long moment, the gray clouds churning above. Then he spoke, his voice rasping. "The documentation, the access logs, the requisition chain, is it really enough?" "I think so," Walker said. "Think isn't good enough," Reed replied, his eyes finally showing a glimmer of the old fire. "No," Walker agreed, "it's not." He looked at Emily. Emily Carter, who had spent over a decade writing things down in a green notebook because she refused to let the world be a blur of errors, reached into the pocket of her tactical vest. She pulled out the notebook and held it up so Reed could see the worn cover and the pages swollen with ink. "I have 11 years of discrepancies in here," she said. "I have the access logs I pulled from public records before we even left Nevada. I have the requisition chain. I have Briggs's name on 4 separate documents connected to a unit that was dissolved specifically after the Syria operation." She took a breath, her voice gaining strength. "And I will stand in front of whoever needs to hear it. I will say exactly what I found and exactly how I found it. I will not let them close this door." Reed looked at the notebook and then he looked at her face. Emily didn't flinch. She meant every word, and Reed was a man who had spent his life learning to distinguish between people who meant what they said and those who were just talking. "Okay," he said. "Just that. One word." When Martinez and the team crested the ridge a few minutes later, Lucas Reed allowed them to approach. He placed his hands where they asked him to. As they began the process of securing him, Emily realized that the most dangerous shot in the history of warfare had just been unmade. It hadn't been stopped by a counter-sniper or a ballistic shield. It had been dismantled by a woman with a notebook, a captain who knew when to sit down, and 3 words spoken into the freezing mountain air. Asterisk, don't let him win. Asterisk, they brought Lucas Reed down from the mountain at 9:14 in the morning. He walked on his own 2 feet the entire way, a detail that mattered to Emily more than she could explain. He was in restraints, as per the non-negotiable protocol Walker had established, but he walked without being guided. He didn't stumble. There was none of the physical collapse she had expected, the kind that usually happens when someone carrying an enormous weight finally sets it down. Instead, he walked with the same precision and dignity he had shown on the ridge. He had made his choice, and he was prepared to live inside the consequences of it. Emily followed behind him, watching the rhythmic movement of his shoulders. She thought about the calculations she had run over the past 4 days, all the variables she had tried to account for, and how none of them had predicted this. She had modeled the physics of the shot, but she had failed to model the physics of the man. At the base of the ridge, the isolation of the mountain gave way to the cold reality of logistics. 2 Swiss federal vehicles were waiting, idling in the gray morning light, alongside a secure transport arranged by Walker's team. Reed was processed with a quiet efficiency, a minimum of the procedural theater that usually accompanied such arrests. Walker spent several minutes talking to a Swiss liaison, his posture professional and distant, while Martinez and Reyes began the grim task of documenting the equipment. They handled the rifle with a kind of reverence, but it was the other items that caught Emily's eye. The atmospheric notebooks Reed had kept were extraordinary. She watched as Martinez gathered them, and she couldn't help herself. She asked to see them. Martinez looked at Walker, who gave a brief, sharp nod. For 12 minutes, Emily stood by the transport vehicle and paged through Reed's records. They were the most meticulous documents she had ever seen. Pages upon pages of wind readings, temperature gradients, and barometric pressure records, all taken at specific elevations and times of day. What she found confirmed her own calculations, and then it went further. Reed hadn't just prepared for one shot. He had prepared for 3 contingency shots from 3 different positions. Each one accounted for different weather patterns, different windows of time, and different sightlines to the conference center terrace. He had done in 9 days what most sniper teams would struggle to accomplish in a month. It told her everything she needed to know about his state of mind. He hadn't been just grieving on that mountain. He had been working. And work, she realized, had been the only thing keeping him from falling apart. The calculations were the container for his soul. Without the precise, all-consuming task of preparing that shot, there would have been nothing between Lucas Reed and the crushing weight of his loss. She handed the notebooks back to Martinez and walked over to the back of the transport. Reed was sitting on the bench inside, the door still open. A Swiss officer stood 3 feet away, watchful but silent. When Emily approached, Reed looked up. His expression was still like a lake after a storm has passed. "Your contingency notebooks," she said, "the atmospheric data. It's extraordinary work." He looked at her for a moment, his eyes tracking the notebook in her hand. "You went through them," he noted. "Martinez let me." Position 2 would have been more favorable than Position 1 for the early morning window, she said, her technical mind taking over. The pressure gradient on the north face creates a stabilizing effect between 0400 and 0530 that Position 1 doesn't get. Reed stared at her for a long time, a flicker of something like respect crossing his weathered face. "I know," he said. "I moved to Position 1 because Position 2 has a 40-meter exposure on the approach, if anyone came up from the south." He trailed off, then added, "I was already thinking about what would happen after, before you even landed." Emily felt that statement hit her with the force of a physical blow. He had been thinking about the after. He wasn't planning an escape. He was too smart for that. He was planning his own surrender on his own terms. He had chosen a position that made an approach possible because, in some part of his mind he might not have even acknowledged, he had left the door open for someone to stop him. She didn't say it aloud, but she filed it away in her mind. "The documentation Walker has," Reed said, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "The access logs. You said you'd stand in front of whoever needs to hear it." "I meant it," she replied firmly. "Military tribunals aren't like civilian courts," Reed warned, "the people running them. They have their own interests." "I know," Emily said. "I also know that what I found is part of the public record. The supply logs, the vehicle requisitions, the equipment sheets, none of it is classified. They can't seal those documents after the fact without explaining why they're sealing routine administrative paperwork. That creates its own trail of questions." She paused, leaning in slightly. "Briggs cannot make this disappear the way he made the intelligence report disappear. The architecture of the lie is different this time." Reed looked at her with something that resembled hope, though it was a fragile, guarded version of it. He was a man who had been burned by the system too many times to trust it fully, but he seemed willing to believe in her. "Okay," he said again. It was the same word he'd used on the mountain, but it carried more weight now. It was a commitment. The transport door closed with a heavy, metallic thud. Emily stood on the mountain road and watched the vehicle pull away, its tires crunching on the gravel. Walker came to stand beside her, the wind ruffling his hair. Neither of them spoke as the dust settled. "The hard part starts now," Walker said eventually. Emily looked at him, surprised. "I thought the ridge was the hard part." "The ridge was the visible part," Walker said, his eyes fixed on the retreating vehicles. "The hard part is what happens when we get back to the States. When I put this documentation in front of people who have very strong, very expensive reasons to want it to go away." Emily thought about Briggs. He was currently 5 days away from a NATO conference in Geneva, likely feeling untouchable. He had no idea that a civilian technician had unraveled his cover-up in a single night. He had no idea that the man he had tried to erase had been taken off a mountain alive. The man could talk, and the paper trail could scream. Everything Briggs had spent months managing was about to become unmanageable. "We need to move before he arrives for the conference," Emily said. "If he lands in Geneva and hears that Reed has been apprehended, he'll know the investigation has accelerated. He'll have time to scrub whatever is left." "I'm already ahead of you," Walker said. He pulled his phone from his pocket. "I made a call from the ridge while you were talking to Reed. The documentation you compiled is already in the hands of the Judge Advocate General's office in Washington. It was transmitted 40 minutes ago." Emily stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "You did that from the ridge." "I had Ray's transmit the digital package we assembled before we even left Nevada," Walker explained. "I wasn't going to walk up that mountain without having already lit the fuse on the other end." He looked at her, a small, grim smile playing on his lips. "I planned for the after too, Emily. That's what I do, just like you." By noon, they were back in the heart of Geneva. The transition from the raw, freezing silence of the peaks to the bustling, sterile atmosphere of the city was jarring. Walker immediately went into a series of secure communications, disappearing into a back room of the safe house the team was using. Emily was left to her own devices, which was exactly how she preferred it. She found a small conference room, opened her laptop, and went back to work. She spent the next 3 hours re-verifying every link in the chain she had built. She looked at the requisition for the specialized optics Reed had used, tracing the serial numbers back through 3 different supply depots until she found the signature that shouldn't have been there. It was a digital ghost, a login credential that had been used after the officer it belonged to had retired. But the IP address used for the authorization pointed back to a terminal in Briggs's office at the Pentagon. It was a small detail, the kind of thing most investigators would overlook, but to Emily, it was a neon sign. As she worked, the gravity of what they had done began to sink in. They hadn't just caught a fugitive, they had intercepted a tragedy and turned it into an indictment. But Walker was right. The system was a beast that didn't like being prodded. Briggs wasn't just a man, he was a node in a massive network of influence. To take him down, they wouldn't just need the truth, they would need the truth to be so loud that it couldn't be ignored. She looked down at her green notebook, resting on the table beside her laptop. It was full now, the last few pages covered in the frantic scribbles of the past 48 hours. She thought about Tyler Brooks and his daughter Sophie. She thought about the 17 months of counting that Reed had done in the dark. The door to the conference room opened and Walker stepped in. He looked tired, the adrenaline of the mountain finally beginning to fade, leaving behind a stark, hollowed-out exhaustion. "Washington has the files," he said, sitting down across from her. "There's a team from the Inspector General's office already moving on the database logs. Briggs is going to be met at the airport when his flight lands for the conference." Emily nodded, her fingers still hovering over the keys. "And Reed? He's being transported to a secure facility in Mannheim," Walker said. "He'll be held there until the preliminary hearing. He asked for one thing before they moved him." "What?" Emily asked. "He asked if you were going to be there," Walker said, "at the hearing." Emily looked at the screen, at the lines of data that represented the life and death of a soldier she had never met. "Tell him I'll be there," she said. "I'm not done writing this down yet." Walker watched her for a moment, then stood up. "Get some sleep, Carter. We leave for Germany in 6 hours." But Emily didn't close her laptop. She didn't go to sleep. She picked up her pen and opened her notebook to the very last blank page. She began to write, not about ballistics or atmospheric pressure, but about the weight of a hand on a rock and the way a man looks when he finally decides to stop waiting for justice and starts making it happen. The story wasn't over, and as long as there were still things that were wrong in the world, Emily Carter would be there to count them. Emily Carter sat in the flickering glow of her laptop screen, the silence of the Geneva safe house pressing in against her ears like a physical weight. She was not a woman who moved with haste. Haste was the enemy of precision, and Emily lived her life by the decimal point. She worked the way she had always worked, treating the mountain of data before her not as a story to be told, but as a mechanical system to be dismantled. She was organizing it, sequencing it, and building the clearest possible picture of the chain she had identified, link by agonizing link. Her method was a slow, rhythmic grind, following the data wherever it led rather than deciding on a destination and pulling the facts toward it. In her world, the truth was not something you created. It was something you uncovered, layer by layer, until the skeleton of the thing was bare. At 3:47 in the afternoon, the skeleton shifted. It was a minute detail, the kind of anomaly that looks like a clerical error until you understand the context, and then it looks like a confession. In the supply logs for Delta 7 Sierra, Emily found a secondary authorization signature on 3 of the documents she had already flagged. It wasn't Captain Briggs's signature. It was a different name entirely, a name that sent a cold ripple of recognition through her, not because she knew the person, but because she didn't. After 11 years of reading administrative documents within the base structure, Emily knew the names of the bureaucrats, the logistics officers, and the middle management colonels like she knew the parts of a rifle. This name was a ghost. She ran the name through every non-classified directory she had access to, her fingers dancing across the keys with a practiced mechanical speed. Nothing. No record of employment, no pay grade, no assignment history. She tried a different approach, searching for the name in conjunction with Operation Stillwater in the publicly accessible portions of the military record system. Again, the screen returned a sterile, empty void. Finally, she paired the name with Delta 7 Sierra. One result blinked onto the screen. It was a single equipment transfer authorization from 8 months ago, dated exactly 2 weeks before the Syria operation. It authorized the movement of 3 pieces of specialized surveillance equipment from a high-security storage facility in Virginia to an undisclosed field location. The authorization was signed by Briggs at the top, but the counter-signature at the bottom, the one that carried the final weight, was the name she had circled. Emily stared at the document for a long time, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her glasses. The implications were settling into her mind like lead. She opened her green notebook, the one that had become a ledger of secrets over the past week, and wrote the name in the center of a fresh page. She circled it 3 times, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper. Then she stood up and went to find Walker. Walker was in the middle of a call when she knocked on his door. Through the heavy wood, his voice sounded low and modulated, the tone of a man who spent his life speaking in rooms where people listened. He held up one finger through the glass pane of the door, a silent command to wait. Emily stood in the hallway, her notebook clutched to her chest. She waited for 4 minutes, counting the seconds by the pulse in her wrist. When he finally hung up and opened the door, she didn't waste time with a greeting. "I found a second signature," she said, handing him the notebook. Walker took the notebook and looked at the name Emily had circled. For a moment, his expression did something she had never seen it do before. It went uncertain. From a man whose face was usually a controlled instrument of authority, a mask of tactical calm through everything they had witnessed, the sudden flicker of hesitation was deeply alarming. It was as if she had handed him a live grenade with the pin already pulled. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Equipment transfer authorization in the Delta 7 Sierra supply logs," she replied, her voice steady. 8 months ago. It's a counter-signature beneath Briggs." Walker was quiet for a long time, his eyes fixed on the name on the page. "Carter, that name," he paused, his jaw tightening. "Do you know who that is?" "No," she said. "I ran it through every directory I have access to. I got exactly 1 hit on the equipment transfer and then nothing. It's like the name exists only for that one specific moment in time." Walker turned away from her and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, looking out at the gray Geneva skyline. That was also new. In the 6 days she had known him, Walker had never turned his back on a situation. He was a man who faced threats head-on, who kept his eyes on the target. This turning away felt like a retreat into thought, a realization that the battlefield had just expanded beyond his line of sight. "That is Deputy Director Alan Morse," he said, still looking out the window. "Defense Intelligence Agency." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The air felt thinner, more charged with a static tension that made the hair on Emily's arms stand up. She had felt this sensation twice before in the past 4 days. Once when she had confirmed that the 3,800-meter shot was physically possible, and again when she had found Briggs's name in the supply logs. It was the feeling of a calculation producing a number that changed the entire equation retroactively. "Briggs didn't make this decision alone," she said, the words heavy in the small office. Walker turned back to face her, his expression reclaimed by a grim, hard-edged focus. "No, he didn't. This goes higher than Briggs. Much higher." "How much higher?" Emily asked. Walker looked at her for a long time, as if measuring how much more weight she could carry. "High enough that the documentation you've already transmitted to JAG may not be enough on its own. High enough that the people who receive those files might be the same people who are authorized to delete them." Emily felt the weight of that realization settle into her bones. She thought about Lucas Reed, the man they had left in a transport vehicle somewhere, headed toward a military facility. He had agreed to stand down to lower his rifle based on Walker's assurance that the truth would be enough. He had placed his trust, a fragile, hard-won, and deeply scarred trust, in the idea that this time the system would work. He believed that the door would not close on him again. "What do we do?" she asked. "We go wider," Walker said, his voice regaining its command. "If it goes high enough that the Judge Advocate General can be pressured internally, then we need an external pressure point. We need to make sure this information is no longer a secret that can be buried in a classified folder." "What does that mean?" "It means the documentation cannot exist only inside the military system," Walker explained. "It needs to exist somewhere the system can't reach it. Somewhere it can't be erased with a single keystroke from a deputy director's office." Emily sat with that for a moment, her mind racing through the implications, the risks, and the variables. She was a civilian weapons technician. She was a woman who spent her days calibrating scopes and testing ballistics in a controlled environment. She was not an intelligence officer. She was not an investigator. She was certainly not equipped or authorized to be engaging in a whistleblowing operation that reached the upper echelons of the DIA. And yet, here she was, in a Geneva safe house, holding a green notebook that contained the spark for a firestorm. "The supply logs are public record," she said slowly, her mind working through the legal architecture. "The vehicle requisitions, the maintenance sheets, the equipment transfers, I pulled all of them from the publicly accessible portions of the base record system. They aren't classified." Walker leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Keep going. If a civilian employee pulls public records and finds inconsistencies, and then reports those inconsistencies to military investigators, that's a protected action," Emily continued. "That's whistleblower territory. If the documentation already exists outside the classified system, then making it exist in additional places doesn't change its classification status. It's just information." Walker was very still. "You're thinking about this very carefully, Carter." "I'm thinking about Sophie Brooks," she said, her voice trembling slightly with a rare flash of emotion. "She's 17 months old. Her father died in a valley in Syria because someone buried a piece of paper that told him there was an ambush waiting for him. And I'm thinking about Lucas Reed, who trusted us enough to put down a rifle. I am not going to let that trust be the most naive thing he ever did." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Emily had started counting these silences because they were the spaces where Walker made his decisions. They were the moments where the tactical officer gave way to the man. "Do it," he said. "Keep it factual. Keep it to public records only. I want you to be able to stand in front of any board of inquiry and explain exactly what you did and why it was legal." "I always can," she said. She went back to the conference room and surrendered herself to the work. For the next 2 hours, she built the clearest, most legally unassailable version of the documentation she could construct. She was an architect of facts. No interpretation, no emotion, no adjectives, just a clean, clinical chain of evidence. She identified every source, timestamped every log, and cross-referenced every signature. She was building a chain so robust that dismantling even a single link would require an explanation so complex it would raise more questions than it answered. At 6:23 in the evening, the door to the conference room swung open. Walker walked in and Emily immediately noticed a change in his posture. He looked tighter, his movements more urgent. "We have a problem," he said. Emily looked up from her laptop, her eyes burning from the screen glare. "What happened?" "Briggs moved his timeline," Walker said. "He's not arriving in 5 days. He's arriving tomorrow morning. Early flight, private charter." Emily felt the cold move through her again. Someone tipped him. "That's what it looks like," Walker said, his jaw tight. "Someone in our communication chain between here and JAG got the transmission and flagged it to someone who flagged it to Briggs. Or maybe they flagged it to Morse." "Morse," Emily whispered. "Possibly." Walker sat down across from her. "Briggs is coming here early, which means one of 2 things. Either he's running, trying to get outside of U.S. jurisdiction before the investigation can fully materialize, or he's coming here to manage the situation from the inside. He's coming to clean up the mess. Which is it?" "I don't know yet," Walker said. "But if he's coming to manage it, he knows Reed is in custody. He knows the documentation exists. And he has resources we haven't even begun to map out yet." Emily looked at her laptop screen, at the 14,000 words of data and logs she had been meticulously curating. "Then we need to move faster than he does," she said. "How long until he lands?" Walker checked his phone. 14 hours. Emily looked at the clock on her laptop. 6:31 p.m. Geneva time. "Then I have 14 hours," she said. She didn't wait for him to respond. She turned back to the screen and began to type. What followed were the most sustained, focused 14 hours of Emily Carter's life. She had built her career on sustained work, on the kind of patience required to watch a barrel cool or to calculate windage for a shot that hadn't been fired yet. But this was different. This was a race against a man in a private jet crossing the Atlantic, a man with the power to make people disappear. She did not sleep. She did not eat except for a sandwich Martinez brought her at midnight. He placed it on the table without a word, and she consumed it without tasting it, her eyes never leaving the columns of numbers on her screen. She went through every public record she could find, digging deeper into the administrative layers of the Virginia storage facility. She was looking for patterns, for the fingerprints of a shadow operation. She found 7 additional documents with Morse's secondary signature. Each one was for a specialized equipment transfer to Delta 7 Sierra. Then, she found the breakthrough. 2 documents connected a shell logistics company to the equipment transfers. The company was called Vanguard Global Solutions. When she ran it through a public business registry, she found it had been registered 18 months ago and dissolved exactly 4 months ago, a timeline that ran perfectly parallel to the existence of Delta 7 Sierra. Next, she found a maintenance link. A vehicle assigned to the unit had been serviced at a facility in Virginia 3 days before the Syria operation. The service record listed the mileage. Emily cross-referenced that with the unit's official operational logs. There was a discrepancy of 340 miles. Someone had driven that vehicle 340 unlogged miles in the days leading up to the ambush. She wrote it all down. She organized the data with the same precision she brought to a ballistic calculation. The principle was identical: account for every variable, eliminate every uncertainty, and follow the trajectory to its inevitable conclusion. In ballistics, you followed the bullet. Here, she followed the money and the signatures. At 4:47 in the morning, the printer in the corner of the room began to hum. Emily gathered the warm sheets of paper, put them into a folder, and walked down the hall. She knocked on Walker's door. He answered immediately, his eyes red-rimmed but alert. He hadn't slept either. She handed him the folder. He stood in the doorway and read it for 11 minutes in total silence. Emily watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hard. "This is more than enough," he said. "Morse's signature is on 9 documents now," Emily said, her voice raspy from disuse. "The shell company connects the logistics directly to the equipment moved before Syria. And the vehicle mileage discrepancy. That puts someone physically present in Virginia who wasn't supposed to be there. This isn't just Briggs burying a report because he was lazy or scared. This was a coordinated operation. The ambush wasn't a failure of communication. It was a construction. Someone wanted those soldiers in that valley." Walker stood very still, the weight of the folder in his hand seeming to pull his shoulders down. "You're saying Tyler Brooks wasn't just an acceptable casualty. You're saying he was a target." Emily had been sitting with that conclusion for 3 hours. She had resisted it at first because it was the kind of conclusion that changed everything. It transformed a case of corruption into a case of premeditated murder. But the data supported it. The timing, the specialized equipment, the secret signatures, it all pointed to a deliberate setup. "I'm saying the data is consistent with that conclusion," she said carefully. "And I'm saying someone with more authority than us needs to find out if it's true." Walker closed the folder. "Briggs lands in 3 hours, I know. I need to be at the airport," Walker said. "I know that too," Emily replied. "Go, I'll stay here. I have more to look into." Walker looked at her for a long moment. It was one of those looks that carried more weight than words ever could. It was the look of a soldier recognizing another soldier, even if she didn't wear the uniform. "Carter," he said, "for what it's worth, you were right about everything. The distance, the position, the target, all of it." "I know," she said. "It wasn't arrogance, it was just a fact." Emily Carter was always right about the math. Walker almost smiled, a brief, weary expression. "I'll be back in 3 hours." He left, the heavy front door of the safe house clicking shut behind him. Emily went back to the conference room. She sat alone in the gray, pre-dawn light of the Swiss morning. She thought about the last 6 days. She thought about the adapter she had built with her own hands in that dusty armory, the piece of metal that had started all of this. She thought about the classified report that had sat in a drawer for 6 hours while 32 men walked into a trap. She thought about Tyler Brooks, whispering his daughter's name in the dirt of a Kandahar base, hoping someone would remember. She thought about Briggs, currently high above the Atlantic, believing he was still the one in control. And she thought about Morse, the man whose name she had circled, who didn't yet know that a civilian technician with a green notebook had just dismantled his life's work. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote the date and the time, day 6, 5:02 a.m. Below it, she wrote 2 words, asterisk not done. Asterisk, she closed the notebook, tucked it into the pocket of her vest, and opened her laptop. Precision required completion, and she wasn't finished yet. Briggs landed at Geneva International Airport at 7:58 a.m. The private charter taxied to the executive terminal, its engines whining down into a low hum. Walker was waiting on the tarmac, flanked by Martinez and 2 Swiss federal officers in dark coats. The morning air was crisp and biting, smelling of jet fuel and cold metal. Briggs walked off the plane in full dress uniform. When Martinez told Emily about it later, she realized it was the most telling detail of the entire encounter. Briggs had worn his authority as a costume, as armor. He stepped onto the pavement, his eyes scanning the small group waiting for him. He saw Walker and stopped, his face a mask of practiced indignation. "Whatever you think you have, Captain, I can assure you that." Walker didn't let him finish. He held up the folder Emily had compiled. He didn't speak. He just held the evidence out like a shield. Inside were the 9 signatures, the shell company registration, the 340-mile discrepancy, and the threads that tied them all together. Briggs stopped talking. He looked at the folder. He looked at Walker's face. According to Martinez, something happened to Briggs's expression that he had never seen in a senior officer's face in 15 years of service. He called it a collapse. It wasn't a physical fall. It was the structural failure of a lie. The man's eyes went hollow as he realized the architecture he had built was made of glass, and Walker had the hammer. "I want a lawyer," Briggs finally said, his voice thin. "That's your right," Walker replied. And then he added, "Staff Sergeant Lucas Reed is in custody and cooperating. He's been talking since yesterday morning. Everything you did to make his reports disappear, it didn't work. It just moved. It moved into a green notebook carried by a civilian who spent 11 years paying attention to things nobody asked her to." He gestured to the folder, and now it's here. Briggs looked at the folder for a long time, the wind whipping at his uniform. Then he said nothing else. The Swiss federal officers moved forward and the formal process of arrest began. Walker stood and watched until they led Briggs away. He looked like a man who had been carrying a mountain on his back and was only now beginning to set it down. Back at the safe house, Emily's phone rang at 8:14 a.m. She picked up on the first ring. "It's done," Walker said. "He's in custody. Swiss Federal is holding him pending extradition. JAG has been notified, and the documentation is being formally entered into the record as we speak." Emily sat back in her chair, the tension leaving her body in a sudden, exhausting wave. "It worked. It worked," Walker repeated. "Carter, you did it." Emily closed her eyes. She thought about Reed on the mountain, about the way he had lowered his rifle. She thought about Sophie Brooks, who would grow up in a world where her father's death actually meant something to the people who caused it. "Walker," she said, her voice regaining its edge. "It's not fully done. Morse, his signature is on those documents. He's not in Geneva." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "No, he's not." "Then we still have work to do," she said. Walker was quiet for a second. "Yeah, we do. Are you ready for that?" Emily picked up her green notebook and looked at the words asterisk not done. "Asterisk yes," she said. The call from Washington came at 9:33 in the morning, less than an hour after Briggs had been processed. It was not the call Walker had been expecting. It wasn't JAG and it wasn't the Pentagon. It was a number he didn't recognize. Emily watched his face as he listened, seeing the micro-adjustments in his expression, the tightening of his eyes, the stillness of his posture. Walker ended the call and stood with his phone in his hand for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at Emily. "Morse isn't in Washington," he said. Emily felt a new kind of silence fill the room, one with teeth. "He flew out yesterday," Walker continued. "Private flight. His office logged it as a personal trip. His destination was Geneva. He's here," Emily said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "He landed at 11:40 last night," Walker said, 7 hours before Briggs. Emily's mind raced, running the timeline backward. Morse had arrived before anyone was watching the airport for him. He had arrived under the cover of night before the trap for Briggs had even been set. "He knew Briggs was coming," Emily said. "He came first to set something up." "That's what I'm thinking," Walker agreed. "What does he set up?" she asked. "He's Dia. He has contacts all over Europe. He could," she stopped, her eyes widening. "He's not here to help Briggs. He's here to cut him loose." Walker stared at her. "Explain." "Morse knows the documentation exists," Emily said, her words coming faster now. "He knows Briggs is compromised. He's here to make sure that when Briggs goes down, the chain stops there. He's here to make sure those 9 documents with his signature become routine administrative errors. He has to get to those documents before they are formally entered into the JAG record. They were transmitted 6 days ago," Walker argued. "Transmitted and received are 2 different things," Emily countered. "If someone inside JAG is flagging our communications, the same person who tipped off Briggs, then those documents are sitting in a queue. They aren't official yet." Walker was already back on his phone, his voice sharp as he issued orders to Reyes and Martinez. He was in pure execution mode now, the deliberative phase gone. Martinez was dispatched to track Morse's location through the Swiss network. while Reyes was tasked with bypassing the standard JAG intake officer to get the files logged by a contact Walker trusted. Emily sat in the middle of the whirlwind, her mind fixed on one question. Why? Why would a deputy director of the DIA personally involve himself in a logistics trail for a single mission? Why would he risk his career to countersign equipment transfers? She looked at her notebook again. 340 unlogged miles, 3 days before the operation. This isn't just about a report, she whispered to the empty room. She thought about the nature of the equipment that had been moved. Specialized surveillance gear, the kind used for high-level signal intercepts. The kind that didn't just listen to the enemy, but could track the exact movements of friendly forces with terrifying precision. The ambush hadn't been a tragedy. It had been a test. She began to type again, her fingers flying. If the 340 miles were driven in Virginia, where did they go? She pulled up a map of the area surrounding the storage facility. She began to plot circles, radius of 170 miles out, 170 miles back. She found a private airfield in the mountains, a place where a small, unmarked plane could land and take off without a flight plan. And then she found the connection. The airfield was owned by a subsidiary of Vanguard Global Solutions, the same shell company that had handled the equipment transfers. The realization hit her with the force of a ballistic impact. The equipment hadn't been sent to Syria to help the Rangers. It had been sent to the airfield, and from there, it had been moved to a different theater entirely. The soldiers in the valley weren't the target. They were the distraction. The 32 men of Delta 7 Sierra had been sent into that valley to draw every eye in the region toward a single point of conflict. While the world was watching a desperate firefight in a Syrian canyon, the specialized surveillance equipment was being used somewhere else, somewhere much more sensitive. Emily felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She looked at the 9 documents. She looked at Morse's name. He didn't just bury the report, she realized. He wrote the script. Walker burst back into the room. We found him. He's at a private residence in Cologne. He's meeting with a legal attaché from the consulate. He's trying to secure diplomatic immunity, Emily said, her voice trembling. Walker, the equipment wasn't in Syria. Walker stopped, his hand on the doorframe. What? The 340 miles, the shell company airfield. The surveillance gear was moved to a different location 3 days before the mission. The Rangers were a decoy. Morse used a combat operation to mask the deployment of unauthorized surveillance tech. Walker's face went pale. Deployment where? I don't know yet, Emily said. But if we don't get Morse now, we'll never find out. Walker looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something that looked like fear in his eyes. Not for himself, but for the scale of the thing they were fighting. Get your things, he said. We're going. Emily grabbed her green notebook and her laptop. She didn't look back at the safe house. She didn't look at the gray Swiss sky. She only looked ahead at the trajectory of the truth and where it was about to land. As they ran to the car, Emily felt the familiar weight of the notebook in her pocket. It was a small thing, a collection of paper and ink. But in the right hands, it was more powerful than any rifle. It was the record of a debt that was finally being called in. The drive to Cologne was a blur of high-speed turns and urgent radio chatter. Martinez was driving, his hands steady on the wheel, while Walker coordinated with the Swiss authorities to set up a perimeter. They couldn't just kick in the door of a private residence involving a DIA official without causing an international incident, but they could block the exits. They could make sure Morse had nowhere left to run. Emily sat in the back seat, her laptop open on her knees. She was digging through the Vanguard Global subsidiary records, looking for the final piece of the puzzle. She needed to know where that equipment had gone. She found it at 10:14 a.m. A shipping manifest for a technical delivery to a location in northern Iraq, dated 2 days after the Syria ambush. The location was a private compound near the border. She cross-referenced the coordinates. It wasn't a military base. It wasn't an embassy. It was a data center. A data center owned by a multinational telecommunications firm with deep ties to several foreign governments. Morse wasn't just hiding a mistake. He was selling access. He had used a military operation to smuggle high-grade U.S. surveillance technology out of the country and into the hands of a private contractor. He had traded 32 American lives for a seat at a different kind of table. Walker, she said, her voice sounding far away. I know where it is. I know what he did. Walker looked back at her, his eyes hard. Tell me, she told him. She laid out the data, the manifest, the coordinates, and the why. She showed him the cost of the trade. By the time she finished, they were pulling up to the gates of the estate in Cologne. The Swiss police had already blocked the road. A black sedan was idling in the driveway, its headlights cutting through the morning mist. A man was standing by the car. He was tall, dressed in a gray overcoat, his silver hair perfectly groomed. He looked like the picture of diplomatic stability. He looked like a man who was used to being the smartest person in the room. "That's him," Walker whispered. The car stopped. Walker stepped out, his hand near his sidearm, but not on it. Emily followed him, her notebook held tight in her hand. Alan Morse looked at them as they approached. He didn't look worried. He didn't look like a man who had been caught. He looked bored. "Captain Walker, I assume?" Morse said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I've heard quite a bit about your recent activities. I must say, your lack of discretion is disappointing." "The documentation has been logged," Morse, Walker said, his voice like grinding stones. "Briggs is in custody. We know about Vanguard. We know about the equipment in Iraq." Morse smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "No is such a subjective word, Captain. What you have is a collection of administrative anomalies and circumstantial links. You have a disgruntled sniper and a civilian technician who has overstepped her clearance. What you don't have is a case that will survive a single day in a closed hearing." He turned his gaze to Emily. "And you must be Miss Carter. I've read your file. 11 years of quiet service. It's a shame you chose to end it this way. You're quite talented with numbers. It's a pity you don't understand how they are actually used in the real world." Emily stepped forward. She didn't feel afraid. She felt a strange, cold clarity. "I understand one thing, Mr. Morse," she said. "I understand the math of a 3,800-meter shot. I understand that for a bullet to hit a target at that distance, every single variable has to be accounted for. Wind, gravity, Coriolis effect, even the temperature of the powder. If you miss one thing, just one, the bullet misses." Morse arched an eyebrow. A fascinating lecture. "What's your point?" "My point is that you missed something," Emily said. "You accounted for the JAG officers. You accounted for the logistics trail. You even accounted for the possibility of a survivor like Reed. But you didn't account for the vehicle mileage." Morse's expression didn't change, but his eyes shifted just for a fraction of a second. 340 miles, Emily continued. "You drove that vehicle yourself, didn't you? You couldn't trust a subordinate to handle the transfer of the equipment to the airfield. You needed to see it done. But you forgot that every vehicle in the fleet has a GPS-independent mechanical odometer. And you forgot that I'm the one who checks the maintenance logs." She held up the green notebook. "I didn't just find your signature," she said. "I found your ghost. And that ghost is currently being uploaded to a public server hosted outside of the U.S. jurisdiction. If anything happens to us, or if this investigation is closed for national security reasons, the entire trail, the manifest, the coordinates, and your personal travel logs, goes live to every major news outlet in the world." The silence that followed was different from any other. It was the silence of a vacuum. Morse looked at her, and for the first time the mask slipped. The boredom was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. "You have no idea what you've started," he hissed. "I know exactly what I've started," Emily said. "I've started the calculation, and I'm going to see it through to the end." Walker stepped forward, his eyes locked on Morse. "It's over. The Swiss are here to take you into protective custody until the extradition request is processed. You can walk to the car, or they can carry you." Morse looked at the Swiss officers, then at the blocked gate, and finally at Emily. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked toward the police car, his movements stiff and robotic. As they watched him being driven away, Walker let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked at Emily, his expression a mix of awe and exhaustion. "Did you actually upload it to a public server?" he asked. Emily looked down at her notebook. "No," she said, "but he didn't know that, and in his world, the possibility of a variable you can't control is the same as a defeat." Walker leaned against the car, a small, genuine smile finally breaking across his face. "Carter, you're terrifying. I'm just precise," she said. She sat back in the car and opened her notebook. She turned to the page where she had written asterisk not done. Asterisk, she took out her pen and drew a single, clean line through the words. Then she wrote a new entry. Day 6, 11:45 a.m., calculation complete. She closed the notebook and looked out the window at the Swiss mountains. For the first time in 6 days, the silence didn't feel like a weight. It felt like peace. She thought about Lucas Reed, who would soon be a free man. She thought about Sophie Brooks, who would know the truth about her father. And she thought about the 3,800-meter shot, the impossible distance that they had somehow managed to bridge. The world was still a complicated, dangerous place. There were still men like Morse in the shadows, and there were still valleys where the truth was buried in the dirt. But as long as there were people who paid attention, people who cared about the decimals and the details, the truth would always find a way to the surface. Emily Carter leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, and for the first time in a week, she let herself fall asleep. The air in the small, cramped office felt heavy, thick with the scent of stale coffee and the electric hum of monitors that had been running for far too many hours. Emily Carter sat at the edge of her seat, her fingers tracing the worn edges of her green notebook. The ink was barely dry on the question she had just scribbled. It was a question that felt like a match held to a fuse, a realization that shifted everything she thought she knew about the mission that had cost Tyler Brooks his life. She looked at the words again, the handwriting sharp and jagged. What was the mission actually surveilling? It wasn't just about a routine patrol or a botched intelligence gathering operation. The discrepancies she'd found, the unlogged miles, the parallel chains of command, the signatures that shouldn't have existed, all pointed toward a single, terrifying conclusion. The mission wasn't what it appeared to be on paper. Unless the surveillance mission, the one Tyler Brooks died on, was looking at something that someone very high up needed to remain unseen. She stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the linoleum floor. Across the room, Captain Walker was just lowering his phone, ending his third call in as many minutes. His face was a mask of controlled exhaustion, the lines around his eyes deepening with every passing hour. Emily didn't say a word. She simply walked over and held the notebook open, the page titled with her singular, burning question. Walker's eyes moved across the paper, tracking the ink. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he finally looked up at her, Emily didn't see surprise. She saw recognition. It was the look of a man who had been sitting with the same dark thought, cradling it in the silence of his own mind, waiting for someone else to finally say it out loud. "You know, don't you?" she said. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment of the silence they had both been maintaining. Walker took a slow, measured breath, the kind a man takes before stepping into a storm. "What I know is classified," he said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly tone that barely carried across the desk. "Then tell me what you can tell me," Emily countered. She wasn't going to let him retreat behind a rank or a regulation. Not after what they had found. Not after the paper trail she had spent the last 48 hours bleeding over. Walker leaned back, his shoulders dropping just a fraction. "The Syria operation had a secondary objective," he said, choosing his words with the precision of a bomb technician. It was a surveillance package targeting a high-level meeting between two individuals. One of them was a foreign national, a person of interest in several ongoing regional conflicts. The other one. He stopped, the silence stretching out between them, filled only by the distant sound of a cooling fan. Was American, Emily finished for him. She felt a cold chill settle in the base of her spine. It wasn't a guess. It was the only variable that made the math work. Walker said nothing, but his silence was a deafening confirmation. Emily felt the full weight of it settle on her then. Not fear exactly, but the specific gravity of understanding that she had been working inside a situation whose depth was far greater than anything she had been shown. This wasn't just a bureaucratic fuck-up. This wasn't just Briggs burying a report to save his career. Tyler Brooks hadn't just died because of a clerical error or a delayed communication. He had died because of what his mission had been getting close to seeing. He had died because the surveillance he was part of was about to produce intelligence that would be catastrophically damaging to someone who had the power to make sure it never saw the light of day. And Lucas Reed, she realized, her voice barely a whisper. Lucas had spent 2 months beating his head against a wall, trying to get someone to acknowledge the truth of what happened on that ridge. He had been pushing on a door that wasn't simply bureaucratically closed. It had been deliberately locked from the inside by people who understood exactly what opening it would reveal. "Lucas doesn't know this," she said, her mind racing to the man currently sitting in a holding cell, the man who had almost ended a life to make the world listen. "No," Walker replied. "He thinks this is about Briggs burying a report. And it is about that. That part is real. That happened. Briggs made that choice and it cost lives, and he will be held accountable for it." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "But what's above Briggs? That's a different investigation, a different set of authorities, and a much longer timeline. But it's connected," Emily insisted. "Yes," Walker admitted. "It's all connected." Emily sat back down, the room feeling smaller than it had a moment ago. She thought about the logistics, the way the signatures on the supply logs matched the timing of the unauthorized miles. It was a beautiful, terrible web of corruption, hidden in plain sight among the thousands of pages of military administration. "Does this change what happens to Reed's case?" she asked. Walker's expression shifted, his jaw tightening. "Not if I can help it. Reed's situation is separate from the larger investigation, at least legally. His actions, the shot, the ridge, the surrender, those are on their own track. What I'm not going to let happen is for the larger picture to be used as a reason to bury his case the way his reports were buried. We can't let the complexity of the cover-up become a shield for the people who caused it." "How do you prevent that?" Emily asked. She knew how these things went. The larger the scandal, the easier it was for small, inconvenient truths to get lost in the noise. "By making sure the documentation is formally entered before Deputy Director Morse can extend that review window again," Walker said. His voice had regained its edge. "That's what Reyes is doing right now. He's at the federal building, hand-delivering the hard copies." At that moment, Walker's phone buzzed on the desk. He snatched it up, his eyes scanning the screen. Something in his face shifted again, relief tight and controlled, but unmistakably there. "It's done," he said, letting out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. "Formally logged, time-stamped on the record. It's out of their hands now." Emily felt something release in her own chest, a knot of tension she hadn't realized was there. The paper trail was official. The evidence she had gathered from the dark corners of the administrative servers was now a matter of legal record. No one could delete it. No one could lose it in a transition. "And Morse?" she asked. Walker's phone buzzed a second time. He read the screen and stood up abruptly, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. "Martinez has a location. Morse is at a hotel 4 blocks from the federal building. He hasn't made contact with anyone from the federal authority yet. He's trying to stay off the radar until he can figure out how much we know. I need to go." "I'm coming with you," Emily said, already standing. Walker looked at her, his mouth opening to deliver a reflexive refusal. Emily didn't give him the chance. "I found his name," she said, her voice steady and unyielding. "I found those 9 documents. I built the chain of evidence from nothing but supply logs and vehicle requisitions. I am coming." Walker looked at her for a long moment, seeing the technician who had turned into an investigator in the span of a week. He closed his mouth, nodded once, and gestured toward the door. "Stay behind Martinez," he commanded. "I always stay behind the people with guns," Emily replied. "I'm precise, Captain, not reckless." The drive to the hotel was short, conducted in a silence that was far more focused than the one before. When they arrived, the scene was not what a casual observer might expect. There was no dramatic confrontation in the lobby, no shouting, no tactical teams bursting through doors with flashbangs. This was a different kind of war, one fought with protocols and quiet authority. Deputy Director Alan Morse was sitting in the hotel's sun-drenched restaurant, a silver coffee pot on the table, and a plate of half-eaten eggs in front of him. He looked like any other high-level executive on a business trip, perfectly composed in a tailored suit. But the moment he saw Walker's face as the captain approached with 2 Swiss federal officers in tow, the composure flickered. It was subtle, a slight tightening of the hand around his coffee cup, a momentary freeze in his breathing, but it was there. Morse was a man who had spent his career in rooms where power was measured in whispers, and he knew instantly that the room had changed around him without his permission. "Captain Walker," Morse said, his voice measured and professional. He set his coffee cup down with a delicate click. "You're a long way from home." "Deputy Director," Walker replied. He didn't offer a hand. Instead, he placed a thick folder on the table right next to the breakfast plate. It was a copy of the documentation Emily had compiled throughout the grueling night. 9 signatures, the shell company details, the vehicle mileage discrepancies, the full, unbroken chain of culpability. "The original has been formally entered into the JAG record as of 22 minutes ago," Walker said. Morse looked at the folder. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what was inside because he was the architect of the silence it broke. Emily stood 6 feet back, positioned beside Martinez, watching Morse's face with the same clinical attention she gave to the readings on a calibration bench. She had seen Briggs collapse at the airport, seen the way a man of lesser metal crumbled when his lies were exposed. But Morse was a different breed. He didn't collapse. He recalibrated. She could almost see the gears turning behind his eyes. He was performing a rapid, controlled reassessment of his options, discarding the ones that were no longer viable, and searching for the narrowest path toward survival. It was a cold, impressive display of intellectual survival. After a moment, Morse looked up from the folder, his gaze settling on Walker. "I'll cooperate," Morse said. It was a simple statement, devoid of emotion. "But I want it on the record that my cooperation is unconditional and begins immediately." "Noted," Walker said. "And I want immunity from the secondary investigation," Morse added, his eyes narrowing. "That's not my determination to make," Walker replied. "You know how this works, Alan. You're part of the record now." Morse looked at him for a long moment, then his eyes drifted past Walker, landing on Emily. He studied her with a particular kind of intensity, the look of a grandmaster trying to identify the pawn that had somehow managed to put him in check. "You're the technician," Morse said. His voice was curious, almost analytical. "The one who found the documents." Emily met his gaze, her posture straight. "Yes," she said. Morse was quiet for a bit, as if he were working through a calculation that kept producing an impossible answer. "From public records?" he asked slowly. "Supply logs, vehicle requisitions, equipment maintenance sheets," Emily replied. Everything was in the standard administrative record system. Nobody classified them because nobody thought anyone would bother to look at the mundane details. Morse stared at her for a long time, the silence of the restaurant pressing in around them. 11 years, he said quietly, almost to himself. He knew her service record. He had probably been briefed on her the moment she started digging. 11 years as a civilian contractor in an armory. 11 years, she confirmed. Something flickered in Morse's expression that Emily couldn't quite name. It wasn't respect. Men like Morse didn't respect people like her, but it was a reluctant acknowledgement. It was the look of a professional who had been outmaneuvered by a variable he hadn't considered worth accounting for. He looked back at Walker. "I'll cooperate," he repeated. This time there were no conditions attached. It was simply a statement of fact. The Swiss federal officers moved forward, and the arrest was carried out with the same quiet efficiency as the approach. As they led Alan Morse out of the restaurant, Emily watched him go. She didn't feel a sense of triumph. Instead, her mind drifted back to a man she had met twice in an armory in Nevada. She thought about Lucas Reed, who had stood at her bench for 40 minutes asking questions about the harmonics of a rifle barrel. She thought about the name he had written on the wall of a forward operating base in Afghanistan. Sophie. Sophie was 7 months old then. She was 17 months old now, growing older every day in a world that, until 6 days ago, had planned to offer her no accounting for what had happened to her father. Emily thought about the shot that was never fired, 4,120 meters. It was the most extraordinary feat of marksmanship in the history of warfare, prepared with meticulous, heartbreaking precision by a man who had decided that if the system would not speak, then the sound of a rifle would have to speak for it. And she thought about the moment on the ridge when Reed had moved his hand away from the trigger. That small, quiet gesture was the loudest thing she had ever witnessed. It was the moment he chose the truth over vengeance, even when he thought the truth would never be heard. Walker came to stand beside her as the restaurant doors swung shut behind Morse. "It's going to be a long road," he said, his voice low. "The secondary investigation, the one looking at what's above Briggs and Morse, that's not a clean 6-day operation. That's going to take years." "I know," Emily said. "You'll be called as a witness multiple times," Walker continued, looking out toward the street. "The documentation you built will be examined, re-examined, and challenged by people who are very good at their jobs and have very strong reasons to want it not to hold. They'll try to find every flaw, every gap in your logic." "I know that too," she said. "It'll hold." Walker looked at her, searching her face. "You're certain?" "I built it," she said simply. "It'll hold." For the first time since they had arrived in Switzerland, Walker almost smiled. "Come on," he said. "We have a debrief in 2 hours, and then we have a very long flight home." The debriefing didn't last 2 hours. It lasted 4. That was the nature of situations that turned out to be larger than their initial parameters. Emily answered every question with the same precision she brought to everything else, factual, sequential, sourced. She identified every document, every timestamp, every access log. She explained exactly how she had bridged the gap between a vehicle requisition in Nevada and a shell company in the Caymans. She was so thorough that the debriefing officers occasionally paused, looking at each other with expressions Emily recognized. It was the specific look of people who were being forced to revise their understanding of the person sitting across from them. At one point, a JAG colonel named Hargrove looked up from his notes and asked her directly, "Miss Carter, what is your formal investigative training?" None, she replied, your intelligence background. None, your law enforcement background. None, sir, she said, pausing for a beat. I'm a weapons technician. I clean rifles. I calibrate scopes. I log serial numbers. She paused again, her voice steady. And I pay attention. Hargrove looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he wrote something in his notepad and moved to the next question. The flight back across the Atlantic was long and quiet. The hum of the transport plane's engines was a constant, vibrating backdrop to the silence of the cabin. Emily managed to sleep for 3 hours, which was more than she had slept in the previous 2 days combined. When she woke up, the green notebook was in her hand. She didn't remember picking it up, but it felt right to have it there, its weight a familiar comfort. She opened it and flipped through the pages she had filled over the last 6 days. The calculations, the names, the timelines, and the 2 words she had written at 5 in the morning, not done. She turned to a fresh page, the paper white and inviting. She thought for a long moment about what to write, about how to categorize the chaos they had just navigated. Finally, she wrote, "What comes next?" Below that heading, she listed 3 things: Reed's tribunal, Briggs's court-martial, and the secondary investigation. She stared at the list for a long time, the reality of it sinking in. Then she put the notebook back in her pocket and looked out the small window at the dark expanse of the Atlantic moving far below. For the first time in a week, she let herself feel something other than the forward pressure of the work. What she felt was grief. It wasn't for anyone specific, but for all of it. She grieved for Tyler Brooks and for Sophie, who would grow up knowing her father only through stories and medals. She grieved for Lucas Reed, a man who had built his life on the idea of precision, only to find that precision was not enough to protect the people he trusted most. And she grieved for the version of the military she had believed in for 11 years. The version where the chain of command existed to protect the mission and the people, where intelligence moved where it was supposed to move, and where the papers were a map of the truth. She grieved that version because she now knew it was more complicated than that. Complexity, in her experience, was always harder to work with than clean variables. But beneath the grief, there was something else, something she didn't have an exact word for. The closest she could get was consequence. There was a profound sense that something had happened that could not be unhappened. The chain of evidence she had built from public records in a Nevada armory and a Geneva safe house was now a permanent part of the record. Briggs's name was there. Morse's name was there. The 340 unlogged miles were there, formally logged and time-stamped, beyond the reach of any administrative review extension. It wasn't justice, not yet and perhaps not completely. Justice, as Walker had said, was the long road. It was the years of litigation, the partial results, the imperfect outcomes. But it was real. She fell back asleep somewhere over the eastern seaboard and only woke when the wheels touched down on the tarmac. 3 weeks later, Emily Carter sat in a military courtroom in Washington, D.C. The air in the room was cool and smelled of floor wax and old wood. She was there to give testimony in the preliminary hearing for Colonel Briggs's court-martial. When she was called to the stand, she felt a strange sense of calm. She was on the stand for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The defense attorney was skilled, a man who had made a career out of introducing shadows of doubt into the most concrete cases. He tried on 4 separate occasions to introduce uncertainty about the sourcing and interpretation of her documentation. Each time, Emily answered with the same patience and precision she brought to a scope calibration. She didn't get flustered. She didn't hedge. She didn't retreat from a single finding. She told the court what she had found, how she had found it, and exactly what it meant. At one point, the attorney suggested that routine counter-signatures couldn't be considered evidence of coordination. Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice clear and echoing in the silent courtroom. She explained, in terms a 12-year-old could follow, exactly why the combination of 9 specific counter-signatures, a dissolved shell company, a parallel timeline of events, and 340 unlogged vehicle miles constituted a pattern that was mathematically inconsistent with routine administrative activity. The defense attorney didn't ask a 5th question. After her testimony, she found Walker waiting in the hallway. He had sat in the gallery for the entire duration of her testimony, a presence she hadn't expected but appreciated. "How do you think it went?" she asked as she reached him. "You were perfect," he said. "I was precise," she corrected. "Perfect is a different standard entirely." Walker looked at her for a moment, then checked his watch. "Reed's tribunal is scheduled for 6 weeks from today. His attorney has requested that you submit a written statement on his behalf, something regarding the ballistic evidence and the circumstances of his surrender on the ridge. Emily had been expecting the request. "I'll write it," she said. "It may not change the outcome," Walker warned. He violated significant regulations. He made a confirmed kill outside of authorized parameters. He went AWOL. "All of that is still on the table." "I know," Emily said. "I'm not writing it to change the outcome. I'm writing it because it's part of the record, and the record should be complete. It's the same reason I write everything down." Walker was quiet for a moment, the bustling activity of the courthouse swirling around them. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said. "I keep thinking about the fact that you found all of this in one night, from public records, after 11 years of nobody ever asking you to look." "Nobody told me not to look either," she replied. "That's not the point, and you know it," he said. She did know it. She had thought about it herself, not with bitterness. Bitterness wasn't a productive variable, but with the clear-eyed recognition of how systems worked. Systems produced the outcomes their incentives rewarded. In a system that made a civilian technician invisible for over a decade, while simultaneously requiring her to be thorough and precise, the result was exactly what they had seen. Until the incentives changed, the truth remained buried in the logs. "What happens to you now?" Walker asked. "I go back to work," she said. "I have 6 rifles that came in from the range yesterday with stress fractures. Nobody reported them. I have a scope calibration backlog that's 3 weeks long and a requisition audit that." She paused, a small, knowing look crossing her face. "Actually, the requisition audit is going to look very different to me now." Walker looked at her curious. "Different how?" "I'm going to pay more attention to the unit designations," she said, "and the secondary authorization signatures, and the shell logistics companies. Things I was always allowed to look at, I just never looked at them quite so carefully." Something in Walker's expression shifted, not a smile, but the cousin of one. "Carter," he said, "when Reed's tribunal convenes in 6 weeks, are you planning to attend?" "I've thought about it," she said. "If I'm not on the witness list, I don't technically have standing to be in the courtroom." "I can arrange standing," Walker said. She looked at him, seeing the offer for what it was. "Then yes, I'm planning to attend." He nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Good." He started to turn away, then stopped. "One more thing. The secondary investigation, the one above Briggs, above Morse, the one that's going to take years. The JAG office has requested a civilian ballistic and administrative specialist to consult on the documentation review. They need someone with a deep familiarity with the existing evidence chain." He looked at her directly. "I recommended you." Emily absorbed the information slowly. She thought about the green notebook in her pocket, about the fresh page she had opened on the plane with those 3 items at the top. She had written that list at 3 in the morning over the Atlantic, not fully knowing that she was writing her own future. "I'll need to keep my position at the armory," she said. "That's already been discussed," Walker replied. "It would be on a consulting basis. You stay where you are and you come when the work requires it." Emily thought about the armory. She thought about the rifles with their hidden fractures, the smell of gun oil and cold metal, and the particular dusty silence of the Nevada desert base. That room had been her world for 11 years, a place where she had been content to be invisible as long as the work was done right. She thought about the captain who had walked into that world and asked her an impossible question, and how the most precise answer she had ever given was the first word she had said to him: "No." She had learned that the truth was far more complicated than a simple no, and far more demanding than a yes. It was more important than any calculation she had ever run on a ballistic computer. She put her hand in her pocket, feeling the familiar weight of the notebook. "Tell them yes," she said. 6 weeks later, in a military courtroom in Washington, Staff Sergeant Lucas Reed stood before a tribunal of 3 senior officers. He was dressed in his full uniform, the fabric crisp, and the medals aligned with mathematical precision. He stood at attention, his back straight, exhibiting that particular stillness that was simply how he existed in the world. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't search for familiar faces or look for sympathy. He looked straight ahead, waiting for the system to do what it was going to do. Emily Carter sat in the 4th row of the gallery, her green notebook resting on her knee. She watched as the charges were read in full. When the tribunal chair asked Reed if he had anything to say before they retreated for deliberation, Reed spoke for 4 minutes. He didn't ask for mercy. He didn't offer a justification for his actions. He acknowledged every charge. He accepted full responsibility for every choice he had made. But at the very end, he said something that wasn't part of his legal defense, something that hadn't been coached by his attorney. It was simply something he needed to say. "Tyler Brooks was the best soldier I ever served with," Reed said, his voice steady and carrying through the room. "And he was the best person I ever knew. Whatever this tribunal decides, I need it to be on the record that he deserved better from the system that sent him into that valley. He didn't get that. And I know I failed him too in the end by choosing a path that would have made the story about me instead of about him." He paused, his gaze softening just a fraction. "I'm grateful that someone stopped me from making that mistake permanent." He didn't look at the gallery when he said it, but Emily knew who that last sentence was for. She had been on that mountain with him when the realization had finally broken through his grief. She wrote his words down in her notebook, capturing them exactly as he said them. That was what she did. She paid attention. She kept the record. She made sure that the things that mattered were not lost to time or silence. The tribunal deliberated for 3 hours and 19 minutes. When they returned, the verdict was read. Reed was found guilty on 3 of the 7 charges: AWOL, unauthorized use of military equipment, and conduct unbecoming. However, the 4 most serious charges, the ones that would have seen him imprisoned for decades, were dismissed. The tribunal had reviewed the full context of the case, including the documentation Emily had unearthed and the written statement she had provided. He was sentenced to 2 years in military prison, with eligibility for review at 18 months. It wasn't a clean outcome. It wasn't a total vindication or a Hollywood ending. It was what it was: partial, imperfect, and real. It was the kind of outcome the world actually produced when people did the hard work of paying attention and refused to let the doors stay locked from the inside. Walker was sitting 2 seats away from Emily in the gallery. When the sentence was read, he exhaled slowly, a quiet sound of release. Emily wrote the sentence in her notebook. She wrote the date and the time. Then she turned to a fresh page and wrote a single name at the top: Morse. Beneath it, she wrote, "Secondary investigation, day 1." She had learned something in the past weeks that she had always known in theory, but now knew in the very marrow of her bones. Precision is not a moment. It is not a single shot, however extraordinary it might be. It is not a single night of work, no matter how thorough. Precision is a practice. It is the daily, grinding commitment to paying attention, to keeping the record, to following the data wherever it leads, and to refusing to look away from things that are wrong simply because looking at them is inconvenient, difficult, or dangerous. 11 years ago, Emily Carter had walked into an armory and started keeping a green notebook because nobody had told her not to. Nobody was telling her to stop now either. And so, she didn't. She understood now that the most important shots in history are not always the ones fired from a rifle. Sometimes, they are the ones aimed and held. The steady hand, the patient eye, the refusal to pull the trigger before the calculation is complete. And sometimes, the most extraordinary marksmanship in the world isn't a bullet traveling 4,000 meters through cold mountain air. Sometimes, it's a woman with a notebook, tracking the trajectory of the truth until it arrives, finally and irrevocably, where it was always supposed to land.